Hello everyone, I am Mano Scaling, and I am here to help you today. I know you use this video to fall asleep, so before that, please like the video and subscribe to the channel, and also tell me where you are from and what time you are watching. Now get comfortable and relax. My name is Elliot Mercer. I'm 34 years old. This happened in October of 2024. I should have known better than to ignore the warnings. Every small town has its stories, tales meant to keep children in line and tourists away from dangerous places. But when you've spent 15 years living in Philadelphia's concrete jungle, those rural superstitions seem quaint, almost laughable. That was my first mistake. The Trussam Pond area of Sussex County, Delaware, isn't exactly a tourist hotspot. It's a place of twisted cypress trees and black water, where the Atlantic coastal plain gives way to swamps and strange shadows. Most people drive right past it on their way to the more inviting beaches of Rehoboth or Bethany. That's probably for the best. I'd taken a week off work, forced vacation time that I'd accumulated over 3 years of refusing to take breaks from my position as a financial analyst. "You need to decompress," my boss had said, her tone making it clear this wasn't a suggestion. "You're burning out." "Elliot!" I couldn't argue. The nightmares had gotten worse, the same ones I'd had since childhood, being chased through woods by something I couldn't see but could feel breathing down my neck. My therapist suggested exposure therapy. Face the forest, camp alone, prove to myself there was nothing to fear. Reconnect with nature, she'd said, as if nature and I had ever been on speaking terms. So I found myself driving down winding roads toward the Great Cypress Swamp, Delaware's largest contiguous forest, with my German Shepherd, Rex, riding shotgun. Rex had been my only companion since my divorce 3 years ago. Loyal, protective, and blessedly uncomplicated compared to human relationships. I'd chosen Trussam Pond after reading about its ancient bald cypress trees, some over 500 years old, creating an otherworldly landscape of knobby knees protruding from the black water. The website described it as hauntingly beautiful, an unfortunate choice of words in retrospect. The ranger station near Trap Pond State Park was my last stop before heading into the more remote area I'd planned to explore. The building was little more than a wooden shack with peeling green paint, staffed by a single park ranger, a leathery man in his 60s with a salt and pepper beard and eyes that had seen too much sun. "Trussam Pond?" he repeated when I told him my destination, his southern Delaware drawl stretching the words. "For camping?" He looked me up and down, taking in my expensive hiking boots that had barely seen dirt, and my high-tech backpack still stiff with newness. "Yes, I read it's quite beautiful." "Primeval." The word felt pretentious as soon as it left my mouth. "It's restricted access after sundown," he said flatly. "Day use only." "Oh." I pulled out my phone, showing him the permit I'd secured online. "But I have this wilderness camping permit for the area." He squinted at the screen, then sighed deeply. "System glitch. Happens sometimes. That area's not safe for overnight stays." "Because of wildlife?" I asked, thinking of bears or coyotes, among other things. He looked out the window toward the line of dark trees in the distance. "The swamp hag doesn't take kindly to strangers after dark." I couldn't help the small laugh that escaped me. "The swamp hag?" His weathered face didn't change. Local name for it. Others call her Maggie James. Story goes, she was a healer back in the 1800s. Lived alone in the swamp, knew every plant and its purpose. Then some locals got sick, children mostly. They blamed her, said she was poisoning the water, practicing witchcraft. He shrugged. Mob justice was quick back then. I shifted uncomfortably. They killed her, drowned her in Trussam Pond, weighted her down with cypress roots. He tapped a faded photograph on the wall, a black and white image of the pond, mist hovering over its surface. "Some say she cursed the place with her dying breath. Some say she never really died." Rex whined softly at my feet, pressing against my leg. "It's just a story," I said, trying to sound more confident than I felt. "Sure is," he agreed, but his eyes said otherwise. "Still, if you're set on camping, I'd recommend the established campground at Trap Pond instead. Got facilities, other people around." "I appreciate the concern, but I really want to get away from people for a bit." I patted Rex's head. "Besides, I've got protection." The ranger looked down at Rex, who wagged his tail at the attention. "Dogs are smart about these things. You pay attention if he starts acting strange." He sighed again, realizing I wouldn't be dissuaded. "At least take this map. Cell reception's spotty out there." He marked several spots on the paper map. "These X's, avoid them. Old hunting blinds, abandoned cabins, sinkholes. Dangerous." One X in particular caught my eye. It was larger than the others, placed directly at what appeared to be the deepest part of Trussum Pond. "What's this one?" I asked, pointing. He hesitated before answering. "That's where they found the Garrison boys back in '98. Brothers went fishing, never came home. Search party found their boat overturned right there, but no bodies." He paused, until 3 weeks later when they both washed up, tangled in the roots. Official report said they got drunk, fell in, drowned. "But you don't believe that?" I couldn't help asking. "Doesn't matter what I believe. Matters what you do." He folded the map and handed it to me. "Stay on the marked trails. Be out before sunset. And whatever you hear at night, don't answer." I thanked him, tucking the map into my pocket with a forced smile. Outside, Rex tugged at his leash, eager to explore, but I noticed his ears were flat against his head. "It's okay, boy," I reassured him, scratching behind his ears. "Just old ghost stories." The ranger watched from the doorway as I loaded Rex into the car. "One more thing," he called. "If you see a woman out there, older lady with long white hair, asking for help finding her herbs, don't follow her, no matter what." I nodded, humoring him, and pulled away down the dirt road leading deeper into the swamp forest. In my rearview mirror, I saw him make a quick sign of the cross before turning back inside. The drive to Trussum Pond took another 20 minutes, the road narrowing until it was little more than a dirt track. The GPS on my phone flickered, lost signal, then recovered, directing me to a small clearing that served as a parking area. A weathered sign indicated the trailhead for the Trussum Pond Loop, a 2-mile path around the pond. Beyond that, unmarked trails spiderwebbed into the deeper swamp. As I unloaded our gear, tent, sleeping bag, provisions for 3 days, I noticed Rex's unusual hesitation. Normally, he'd be investigating every scent, marking territory, but instead he stayed close to my legs, his body tense. "What's gotten into you?" I murmured, but deep down I felt it too. The silence was oppressive. No bird song, no insect buzz, just the occasional plop of water droplets falling from cypress branches into the dark water. I shouldered my pack and set off down the trail, Rex trotting nervously beside me. The main loop was well maintained, bordered by informational signs about the ecosystem and history of the swamp. None mentioned Maggie James or any swamp hag. About halfway around the pond, the main trail continued, but a narrower path branched off, disappearing into thicker woods. According to my map, this less traveled route led to a small island, more of a raised hummock that would make an ideal camping spot. Defensible, dry, with good visibility. As we turned onto this path, the change was immediate. The trail narrowed, became muddy and indistinct. Cypress knees, those strange wooden protrusions that grow up from the root systems, became more numerous, looking unsettlingly like fingers reaching out of the black water. Spanish moss hung in thick curtains, further dimming the already fading afternoon light. "Stay close," I told Rex, unnecessary as he was practically walking between my legs at this point. An hour later, we reached the island. It was perfect. A raised area about 30 feet across, relatively dry with enough flat space for my tent. Ancient cypress trees provided a natural windbreak, their massive trunks wider than my car. I quickly set up camp, wanting to finish before darkness fell. The tent was a one-person ultralight model, just large enough for me and Rex. I prepared a small fire pit, collected kindling, and hung our food from a branch to keep it away from wildlife. As I worked, I caught glimpses of movement from the corner of my eye. Never anything definite, just shadows shifting in ways that seemed unnatural. Rex noticed too, his head snapping toward each disturbance, a low growl building in his throat. Just animals, I told him, not believing it myself. The sun set quickly, darkness falling over the swamp like a heavy blanket. I lit the fire, the flames pushing back the shadows but somehow making the darkness beyond seem even deeper. Rex and I ate a simple dinner. Canned stew heated over the fire for me, premium kibble for him, as night creatures began their chorus. It wasn't the normal sounds of a forest at night. There were no cricket chirps or frog calls, just occasional splashes in the water and the creaking of trees in a wind I couldn't feel. And sometimes something else, a sound like a woman humming, distant and mournful. "You hear that?" I whispered to Rex, who whined in response, ears perked forward. The humming came and went, sometimes seeming to circle our island. I told myself it was just the wind through the cypress branches or water flowing through hollow logs. The alternative was unthinkable. By 10 o'clock, exhaustion overcame my unease. I doused the fire, crawled into the tent with Rex, and zipped us in against the night. He curled against my side, still alert, his body tense. Despite my anxiety, the day's hike and fresh air soon pulled me towards sleep. I dreamed of water. Black, viscous water rising around my ankles, my knees, my chest. In the dream, I wasn't on the island anymore, but standing in the middle of Trussum Pond. Something moved beneath the surface, circling me. White hair billowed around a face I couldn't quite see. Bony fingers reached for my legs. "You shouldn't be here," a voice whispered, seeming to come from everywhere at once. "This is my place." I tried to run, but the water held me like tar. The fingers wrapped around my ankle, pulling. I opened my mouth to scream, and woke to Rex's frantic barking. I sat up, disoriented. The tent was intact, but something was wrong. The temperature had dropped dramatically. My breath fogged in front of my face. Rex stood at the tent entrance, hackles raised, barking at something outside. "What is it, boy?" I fumbled for my flashlight. Through the thin nylon of the tent, I could see a figure silhouetted against the night. The unmistakable outline of a woman, tall and thin with what looked like long, flowing hair. She was perfectly still, standing at the edge of our island where land met water. Rex's barking became more desperate. I unzipped the tent with shaking hands and pointed my flashlight toward the figure. Nothing was there, just cypress knees and black water. "Hello," I called, my voice sounding small in the vast darkness. Only the soft lapping of water against the shoreline answered me. Rex was still growling, his eyes fixed on the spot where I'd seen the figure. I knelt beside him, trying to calm him while scanning the darkness. The mist had thickened, curling around the cypress trees and drifting across the water's surface. "It's okay," I whispered, more to myself than to Rex. "There's nothing there." But as I turned to go back inside, a voice carried across the water. A woman's voice, soft and plaintive. "Can you help me find my herbs? I've lost my way in the dark." Every hair on my body stood on end. Rex whimpered, pressing against my legs. "Who's there?" I called, my voice breaking. "Just an old woman gathering medicine," came the reply, closer now. "Be a kind soul and help me look." The ranger's warning echoed in my mind. If you see a woman asking for help finding her herbs, don't follow her, no matter what. I can't," I stammered. "It's too dark. Maybe in the morning." A long silence followed, broken only by Rex's continued growling. "Morning will be too late," the voice said, noticeably colder. "But very well. Perhaps I'll find what I need myself." The mist swirled, and and for a moment I thought I saw her clearly. An elderly woman in a tattered dress, her white hair hanging in wet ropes around a face that was both ancient and somehow ageless. Then the mist closed in, and she was gone. I retreated into the tent, zipping it shut with trembling hands. Rex refused to lie down, instead standing guard at the entrance, his body rigid with tension. I checked my phone, no signal, and the battery was draining unusually fast, already down to 42% despite being fully charged that morning. Sleep was impossible now. I sat with my back against my backpack, flashlight in one hand, hunting knife in the other, listening to the sounds of the swamp. Somewhere in the distance, I heard splashing, as if someone was wading through water, circling our island. The night stretched endlessly. At some point, I must have dozed off despite my terror, because the next thing I knew, watery morning light was filtering through the tent walls, and Rex was pawing at the zipper, desperate to get out. I opened the tent and he bolted, relieving himself against a nearby tree before returning to my side, noticeably calmer in the daylight. The island looked different in the morning, less threatening, almost peaceful. Birds called from the trees. A light mist hovered over the water, and sunlight dappled the ground through the cypress canopy. "See?" I told Rex, trying to convince myself. "Nothing to worry about. Just got spooked by local legends and too much imagination." But as I prepared breakfast, I noticed something that froze my blood. Circling our island, pressed into the mud at the water's edge, were footprints. Small, barefoot impressions that emerged from the water on one side of the island, tracked around our campsite, and disappeared back into the water on the other side. They hadn't been there yesterday. As I stared at the tracks, a twig snapped in the forest behind me. I spun around to see a man stepping out of the trees onto our island. A stranger in worn jeans and a flannel shirt, with a scraggly beard and wary eyes. He carried a fishing rod and a small tackle box. "Didn't expect to find anyone out here," he said, his voice thick with the local accent. He looked to be in his 50s, deeply tanned with the leathery skin of someone who spent most of his life outdoors. "You scared me," I admitted, trying to calm my racing heart. Rex moved between us, not growling but alert. "Good dog you got there." The man nodded approvingly. "Protective. You need that out here." He looked around at my campsite, frowning slightly. "You staying overnight?" "That was the plan. I have a permit." I felt defensive, though the man hadn't accused me of anything. "Not saying you don't." He set down his tackle box. "Name's Bill Corson. Been fishing these waters since I was a boy." "Elliot Mercer," I replied, extending my hand. He shook it, his palm calloused and strong. "You picked an interesting spot," Bill said, gesturing to the island. "Not many folks camp here." "Because of the swamp hag?" I asked, trying to sound amused rather than terrified. Bill's expression darkened. "That what the ranger told you?" Humph. He spit into the water. "Rangers, they like to scare city folks with those old tales." "So, you don't believe them?" I felt a surge of relief. "Didn't say that." Bill glanced at the footprints in the mud, then back at me. "But it ain't no hag. It's Maggie James herself, and she ain't evil like they say. Just territorial." "You talk like she's real," I said, trying to keep my voice light. "Real enough." Bill shrugged. "This was her home. They took it from her, killed her for knowing things they didn't understand. Now she protects it." He nodded toward the water. "These are healing waters, if you know how to use them. Maggie did. She takes care of her own." "Her own?" "Locals who respect the old ways leave offerings, don't take more than they need." He fixed me with a steely gaze. "You leave anything for her when you arrived?" I shook my head. "Bad form," Bill clicked his tongue. "She appeared to you last night, didn't she?" The question sent a chill through me. "How did you know?" "She always does. First night someone new stays on her island. Asks for help finding her herbs." "And if you help her?" I asked. though I already suspected the answer. Nobody ever comes back to tell. Bill reached into his pocket and pulled out a small cloth bundle. Here, leave this at the edge of the water before sundown. Tobacco, sage, bit of cornmeal, old offerings. I took the bundle hesitantly. Why are you helping me? Don't particularly want your death on my conscience, he said matter-of-factly. Besides, my granddaddy was one of the few white men who traded fairly with Maggie. She remembers. He pointed to another island barely visible through the cypress trees. I'll be over yonder till dusk if you need anything. But after dark, you're on your own. He picked up his tackle box. And word of advice, don't go in the water. Not for any reason. With that, he trudged off through the shallow areas, disappearing around a bend in the shoreline. I looked down at the bundle in my hand, then at Rex, who was sniffing the mysterious footprints. What do you think, boy? Should we just pack up and leave? A rational part of me, the financial analyst who dealt in numbers and probabilities, screamed yes. But another part, a stubborn pride I couldn't quite shake, resisted. I'd come out here to face my fears, not run from them. Besides, it was just one more night. I spent the day exploring the island and the surrounding shoreline, always keeping to solid ground as Bill had warned. The swamp was actually beautiful in daylight, sunlight filtering through Spanish moss, turtles basking on logs, herons stalking fish in the shallows. Rex seemed to have forgotten his fear from the night before, happily sniffing everything and occasionally pointing out wildlife I would have missed. By late afternoon, I'd almost convinced myself that the previous night had been nothing but anxiety and an overactive imagination fueled by local superstition. Almost. As the sun began to sink, painting the cypress trees in golden light, I remembered Bill's offering. Following his instructions, I placed the small bundle at the water's edge on the eastern side of the island, feeling slightly foolish but unwilling to risk offending whatever or whoever might be watching. Just a local custom, I told Rex, who watched the proceedings with tilted head, like throwing a coin in a fountain. I made dinner as darkness fell, building the fire larger than the previous night. Bill had not returned from his fishing spot, though occasionally I heard the distant splash of a cast line hitting water. Night descended, and with it came the strange silence I'd noticed before, the unnatural hush of a forest holding its breath. No insects chirped, no frogs called. Even the water seemed to still, its surface becoming a perfect black mirror reflecting the emerging stars. Rex noticed it too, his playful demeanor vanishing as he positioned himself by the fire, facing outward into the darkness, ears constantly swiveling to track sounds I couldn't hear. I checked my phone, battery at 17% now despite minimal use and still no signal. I turned it off to conserve what power remained for emergencies. My flashlight and headlamp were both fully charged, at least, and I had spare batteries. As midnight approached, Rex suddenly stood, his body tense but not aggressive. He stared toward the eastern edge of the island, where I'd left the offering. Heart pounding, I directed my flashlight beam toward the spot. The bundle was gone. "Hello?" I called softly. "Maggie!" No answer came, but the mist began to gather again, thickening around our island. It moved against the slight breeze, pooling and swirling as if alive. Rex whined but didn't bark or growl. He seemed less frightened than the previous night, though still wary. Then I saw her, a figure at the water's edge, more substantial than before. An elderly woman with long white hair, wearing what looked like a simple dress from another century. She stood with her back to me, staring out over the water. "Thank you for the offering," she said without turning, her voice the same I'd heard the night before, ancient and somehow fluid, like water over stones. It's been a long time since anyone remembered the old ways. My mouth was dry as dust. "Bill gave it to me. Said you might be angry otherwise." "Bill Corson," she mused. "His people have long memories." Finally, she turned and I caught my first clear glimpse of her face. weathered like old leather but with eyes as black and deep as the pond itself. Not malevolent, but not human either. Not anymore. "Are you really her?" I managed to ask. "Maggie James? What's left of her?" The apparition drifted closer, her feet not quite touching the ground. Rex trembled but held his position. "They took my life, but not my purpose. I still protect this place." "From what?" "From those who would harm it, take from it, without giving back." Her gaze penetrated me. "Why have you come here, Elliot Mercer?" The use of my name sent another shiver through me. "How do you—" "I know everyone who enters my domain," she interrupted. "I've watched you since you arrived. Now answer my question." "I came to face my fears," I said honestly. "I've had nightmares about forests my whole life. Something chasing me, hunting me." A strange expression crossed her face. Surprise, perhaps, or recognition. "These dreams, do you see what pursues you?" I shook my head. "Never. I just feel it behind me, getting closer." She was silent for a long moment, the mist swirling around her like a living shroud. "Your offering is accepted," she finally said. "You may stay this night unmolested, but tomorrow you must leave. This is not your place." Relief washed over me. "Thank you. I'll go at first light." She nodded, then her form began to dissipate, merging with the mist. Before she vanished completely, she said one last thing. "The dreams you have, they are warnings, not fears. Remember that, Elliot Mercer." And then she was gone, leaving only thinning mist and questions. I didn't sleep much that night, but nothing else disturbed us. Rex eventually relaxed enough to curl up beside me, though he woke at every sound, his ears constantly moving. I lay awake wondering about Maggie's words. Warnings, not fears. What did that mean? Dawn broke misty and cool. I packed quickly, eager to be away from Trussam Pond despite having apparently made peace with its spectral guardian. Rex seemed equally ready to leave, pulling toward the trail before I'd even finished my meager breakfast. As I shouldered my pack for the hike out, I noticed something strange. A small clay pot had appeared beside the ashes of our fire. It contained a greenish paste that smelled of herbs and earth. Attached was a scrap of aged paper with spidery handwriting. For the dreams. 1 spoonful before sleep. I hesitated, then tucked the pot into my pack. Gift or threat, I couldn't leave it behind. The hike back should have been straightforward. Follow the narrow trail to the main loop, then take the loop back to the parking area. But something was wrong. The trail seemed different, twisting in ways I didn't remember. Landmarks I'd noted on the way in were missing or changed. After an hour of walking, we should have reached the main trail, but instead found ourselves in increasingly unfamiliar territory. "This can't be right," I muttered, consulting my map. According to it, we should have hit the main loop long ago. I tried my phone, but the battery was dead. Rex seemed unsettled too, frequently stopping to sniff the air or look back the way we'd come. Several times he tried to lead me in a different direction than the trail, pulling at his leash and whining. "What is it, boy?" I asked, but he only pulled harder away from the path. The swamp around us had changed as well. The trees grew denser, the water darker. The mist, which should have burned off with the morning sun, instead thickened until visibility dropped to less than 20 feet in any direction. By noon, I was forced to admit the truth. We were lost. Every path looked the same, every cypress tree identical to the last. The map was useless without landmarks I could identify. "We should have listened to her," I told Rex as we stopped to rest. "Should have left as soon as Bill gave us that warning." As if summoned by the thought, I heard a voice calling from somewhere in the mist. "Hello? Anyone out there?" It was Bill's voice, unmistakable with its thick Delaware accent. "Here!" I shouted back. "We're over here!" Rex's reaction was immediate and alarming. He growled deep in his throat, backing away from the direction of the voice. His hackles rose, and he bared his teeth. "Rex?" I questioned, but he only growled louder as footsteps approached through the underbrush. Bill emerged from the mist, looking exactly as he had the day before. Same flannel shirt, same fishing rod. He smiled when he saw me, but the expression didn't reach his eyes. "Got yourself turned around, didn't you?" he said, staying a few feet away. Rex continued to growl. "Easy to do in this swamp. Trails shift sometimes." "I thought I was following the right path," I said, keeping a firm hold on Rex's leash. "Something's not right. Even the map doesn't make sense anymore." Bill nodded thoughtfully. "Happens sometimes, especially when she doesn't want someone to leave." A chill ran through me despite the humid air, but she said I could go, that my offering was accepted. Did she now? Bill's tone was skeptical. "Well, lucky for you I came looking. I know a shortcut back to the parking lot. Follow me." He turned and began walking away, gesturing for me to follow. But Rex planted his feet, refusing to move, his growl becoming more threatening. "What's wrong with your dog?" Bill asked, frowning. "He's usually good with people," I said, trying to calm Rex. "Must be stressed from being lost." "Well, get him under control. We're burning daylight, and you don't want to be in these woods after dark. Not again." He was right about that, at least. I tugged at Rex's leash, but he resisted with all his strength, his eyes never leaving Bill. "Come on, boy," I pleaded. "We need to get out of here." With extreme reluctance, Rex finally allowed me to lead him forward, though he maintained a constant low growl. We followed Bill through the swamp, moving away from any trail I could discern, wading through shallow water at times. "Are you sure this is the right way?" I asked after 30 minutes of trudging through increasingly difficult terrain. "Shouldn't we stick to the trails?" "Trails don't always lead where you think," Bill replied without turning around. "This way's faster. Trust me." But something was wrong. The sun, what little I could see of it through the mist and trees, seemed to be on the wrong side. If we were heading back toward the parking area, it should be behind us, not to our left. And Bill kept glancing back at me with an expression I couldn't quite read. Expectant, almost hungry. Rex hadn't stopped growling, not once in the entire journey. And now I noticed something else. Bill wasn't leaving any footprints in the soft mud. His feet touched the ground, but no impressions remained. "Stop," I said suddenly, halting in my tracks. "This isn't the way out." Bill turned slowly. "Sure it is. Just a bit further now." "No," I said with growing certainty. "You're leading us deeper in, away from the road." A smile spread across Bill's face, too wide, stretching unnaturally at the corners. "Smart man. Smarter than most who come here." His voice had changed, becoming higher, more feminine, with an echoing quality that raised the hair on my arms. "Who are you?" I demanded, though I feared I already knew. "You met Bill Corson yesterday," the thing wearing Bill's appearance said. "Nice man, good fisherman. He left at dusk, like he told you he would." The smile widened further. Should have done the same. Elliot Mercer. Before my eyes, Bill's form began to change, his sturdy frame elongating, thinning, his features melting like wax until they reformed into the face I'd seen last night, the ancient woman with eyes like black pools. But this wasn't the Maggie who had accepted my offering. This creature's face was contorted with malice, her mouth too wide, filled with teeth like cypress splinters. "You said I could leave," I stammered, backing away slowly. "I said you could stay one night unmolested," the thing hissed, her voice bubbling like water over rocks. "I never promised safe passage out. This is my domain, and I decide who leaves." Rex was barking furiously now, straining at his leash. The creature, Maggie, the swamp hag, whatever she was, took a step toward us, her feet hovering inches above the ground. "The dreams you have," she said, her voice almost gentle now. "I sent them, year after year, calling you back." "Back?" I repeated, confused. "I've never been here before." "Not in this life," she agreed. But your blood has. Your great-grandfather was among those who drowned me, Elliot Mercer. Did you never wonder why your family name appears in the local histories? Why you felt drawn to this place? My mind reeled. My father had mentioned Delaware roots, but nothing specific, nothing about this area. Yet something resonated, a terrible recognition, a guilt buried deep in genetic memory. Your ancestor held me under the water himself, she continued, drifting closer, his hand on my throat while I cursed his line with my dying breath. And now, after all these generations, you've returned, the last of his blood. That's not my fault, I said desperately. I had nothing to do with what happened to you. No, she agreed, but blood demands blood. The cycle must close. She reached out one withered hand. Your dog sees me truly. Animals always do. He tried to warn you. I glanced down at Rex, still snarling at the apparition. Then I looked back up, and she was gone. But her voice whispered from everywhere at once. Run, Elliot Mercer. Run, like in your dreams. Let's see if you can outpace your family's sins. Terror shot through me like electricity. Without conscious thought, I turned and fled, crashing through underbrush, splashing through shallow water, Rex bounding beside me. Behind us came sounds no human throat could make. A bubbling laugh, the creak of ancient wood, the splash of something large moving through water. The mist thickened until I could barely see a few feet ahead. Branches whipped my face, roots threatened to trip me, but I dared not slow. The knowledge that I was being hunted drove me forward with fear I had never known, except in my nightmares. The same nightmares that had plagued me since childhood. Warnings, she had called them. Now I understood. I don't know how long we ran. Time lost meaning in that place. The swamp seemed endless, every direction identical, the mist disorienting. My lungs burned, my legs trembled with exhaustion, but each time I slowed, I heard her behind me, that terrible bubbling laugh, closer each time. Rex suddenly veered left, pulling me after him with such force that I nearly fell. I had no choice but to follow as he dragged me through a nearly invisible gap between two massive cypress trees. And then, miraculously, we were on a trail, overgrown but distinct, leading away from the water. I let Rex guide me, trusting his instincts as we pushed forward. The sounds of pursuit faded slightly, though never disappeared completely. The mist began to thin, allowing glimpses of sky. The trees grew less dense. Hope surged through me as I recognized a landmark, a peculiarly shaped cypress I'd photographed on our way in. We were approaching the main loop trail. Rex sensed it too, pulling harder, his panic giving way to determination. We burst onto the wider trail just as the sun broke through the clouds. The change was immediate. The oppressive atmosphere lifted. Sounds of normal forest life resumed. Birds calling from the trees. Insects buzzing in the underbrush. Rex's posture relaxed slightly, though he continued to look back the way we'd come, still wary. I checked my phone, surprised to find it had power again. 15%, enough to check our location. The GPS placed us on the main Trussum Pond loop, less than half a mile from the parking area. I almost sobbed with relief. "We made it, boy," I gasped, still struggling to catch my breath. "Come on, just a little further." We hurried along the trail, the rational part of my mind trying to process what had happened. A local legend, mass hallucination induced by swamp gas, panic attack triggering paranoid delusions. I cycled through explanations, each less convincing than the last. But one thing I couldn't rationalize away, Rex had seen it too, whatever it was. The parking lot came into view, my car sitting alone on the gravel, exactly as I'd left it. I fumbled with my keys, hands still shaking, and threw our gear into the trunk without bothering to organize it. Rex jumped into the passenger seat without being told, his eyes fixed on the tree line as if expecting pursuit. As I slid behind the wheel, I caught movement in my peripheral vision, a figure standing at the edge of the forest. I turned my head slowly, dreading what I might see. It wasn't the swamp hag, it was the park ranger from the station, watching us with an unreadable expression. He raised his hand in what might have been a greeting or a warning, then turned and disappeared back into the trees. I started the engine and pulled away, gravel spitting from beneath my tires. In the rearview mirror, I saw mist beginning to rise from the pond, even in the bright morning sunlight. I drove faster. The journey home passed in a blur. I stopped only once for gas, refusing to let Rex out of my sight even for a moment. By evening, we were back in Philadelphia. The concrete and steel of the city a comforting barrier between us and what we'd left behind. My apartment welcomed us with its familiar smells and sounds. Traffic outside, the hum of the refrigerator, a neighbor's television through the wall. Normal things. Safe things. I showered, fed Rex, and collapsed into bed. Physical and emotional exhaustion finally overwhelming my lingering fear. That night, I dreamed again. The same chase through dark woods, the same unseen pursuer. But this time, I knew what hunted me. And this time, I turned to face it. The swamp hag stood before me, her form shifting between the withered crone and something older, more primeval. Bark-like skin, hair of Spanish moss, eyes like the black water of Trussum Pond. "You escaped," she said, her voice like water trickling through roots. "I'm awake now," I told her. "This is just a dream. You have no power here." She laughed, the sound rippling around us. "Is that what you believe? That nightmares can't follow you home?" I woke with a start, heart pounding. Rex stood at the foot of my bed, growling at the darkened hallway outside my bedroom. The digital clock read 3:17 a.m. "What is it, boy?" I whispered, reaching for the baseball bat I kept beside my bed. Rex's growl deepened as I approached the hallway. The air felt different, colder, damper. A smell like wet earth and rotting vegetation filled my nostrils. From the bathroom came the sound of water dripping, though all faucets had been tightly closed. I flipped on the hallway light. Water pooled on the tiled floor, seeping from beneath the bathroom door. Black water, like that of Trussum Pond? "No," I breathed. "It's not possible." From behind the door came a soft humming, the same melody I'd heard in the swamp. Rex barked once, sharp and challenging, then fell silent, pressing against my leg. Fight or flight instinct warred within me. I could run, grab my keys and Rex and flee the apartment. But to where? If she could follow me here, what would stop her from following me anywhere? The small clay pot Maggie had left by our campfire sat on my bedside table. "For the dreams," she had written. "1 spoonful before sleep." Was it poison? Protection? I had no way to know. The bathroom door creaked open a fraction of an inch, water flowing more freely now. The humming grew louder. I made my decision in an instant. Lunging back to the bedside table, I grabbed the clay pot, removed the lid, and swallowed a spoonful of the bitter paste without allowing myself to hesitate. It tasted of earth and roots and something metallic. Blood, perhaps. The effect was immediate. The room spun around me, my vision blurring. I collapsed onto the bed, Rex leaping up beside me, whining anxiously. The last thing I saw before consciousness fled was the bathroom door swinging fully open, a figure of mist and shadow emerging, and then darkness. Complete, absolute darkness unlike any I'd known. When I opened my eyes again, dawn light filtered through my bedroom window. I sat up slowly, expecting nausea or dizziness, but felt only a strange clarity. Rex lay beside me, watching my face with intelligent eyes. The floor was dry, the bathroom door closed. No sign remained of the night's visitation, if it had ever truly happened. But something had changed. I could feel it in my bones, in the very fabric of my being. I went to the bathroom mirror and gasped at my reflection. My eyes, always hazel before, now appeared darker, with flecks of black that shifted when I moved my head, like sediment swirling in pond water. My phone rang, startling me. Unknown number, Delaware area code. I answered warily. Mr. Mercer, it was the ranger from Trussam Pond. Just checking you made it home all right. How did you get this number? I asked, my voice steadier than I expected. A pause. You provided it on your camping permit. Of course. I'm fine, I said. We're both fine. Good, good. He hesitated. Did you encounter anything unusual during your stay? I contemplated lying, but saw no point. Yes, the swamp hag, Maggie James, whatever you want to call her. A sharp intake of breath. And you survived. She said I was the last of my bloodline, that my great-grandfather helped kill her. Mercer, he murmured. I should have recognized the name. Thomas Mercer led the mob that drowned her in 1879. Another pause. You took something from the swamp, didn't you? I glanced at the clay pot. She left it for me. For the dreams. Her medicine, he said gravely. Did you use it? Yes, last night she followed me home. The ranger was silent so long I thought the call had dropped. Finally he spoke. Listen carefully, Mr. Mercer. Maggie James was a healer before they killed her. What most don't understand is that she worked with two medicines. One to heal, one to harm. If she gave you medicine and you survived taking it, that means one of two things. Either she forgave your bloodline's sins. He trailed off. Or, I prompted, or she claimed you, made you part of the swamp, part of her. A chill ran through me. What does that mean? I don't rightly know, he admitted. No one who's taken her medicine has ever spoken of it after. But they say those who drink from Trussam Pond are bound to it forever. They always return, sooner or later. After hanging up, I sat on the edge of my bed, Rex's head heavy on my knee. The city noises outside my window seemed distant now, less real somehow. Instead, I heard water lapping against cypress roots, wind through Spanish moss, the secret sounds of the swamp calling me back. I opened the clay pot again, studying the dark mixture within. It didn't look sinister, just herbs ground to paste, the kind of natural remedy people had used for centuries before modern medicine. I replaced the lid carefully. In the bathroom mirror, my eyes seemed darker still, the black flecks more prominent. When I closed them, I could see Trussam Pond as clearly as if I stood on its shore. The ancient trees, the black water, the mist dancing across its surface. And somewhere in that mist, Maggie James watched and waited. Was I cursed or blessed? Claimed or forgiven? The distinction seemed increasingly irrelevant. What mattered was that a connection had been forged, between me and the swamp, between my blood and hers, between the man who had taken her life and the last of his line. I knew with bone-deep certainty that I would return to Trussam Pond, not out of fear or curiosity, but necessity, like a migrating bird following ancient patterns written in its DNA. Whether next week or next year, the swamp would call, and I would answer. The nightmares have stopped. Instead, I dream of black water and cypress trees, of an old woman gathering herbs in the mist. She turns to me sometimes, her ancient eyes meeting mine, and nods in recognition. Not enemy, not friend, but something in between, bound by blood and justice and the strange magic of the swamp. Rex knows it too. Sometimes I catch him staring at me, head tilted as if trying to reconcile the master he knew with what I'm becoming. But he stays by my side, loyal despite the changes. Dogs are smart about these things, as the ranger said. They see truly. I've begun researching my family history, tracing the Mercer line back through Delaware's past. I found Thomas Mercer in the county records, wealthy landowner, town selectman, upstanding citizen by all accounts. No mention of a mob or a drowning or a swamp witch. History is written by the victors, after all. But I know the truth now. I feel it in my veins, where Mercer blood mingles with Maggie's medicine. And when the time comes to return to Trussam Pond, I'll go willingly, to atone, to understand. perhaps even to belong. I check the clay pot each morning. The level of the mixture never decreases, no matter how much I use. A small miracle that would have frightened me once, but now seems perfectly natural. Like the way water seeps under my bathroom door some nights, bringing the smell of cypress and decay. Or the way Rex sometimes barks at empty corners of the apartment, tracking an invisible presence with his eyes. We are never truly alone anymore, Rex and I. Maggie James walks with us through city streets, a shadow at our heels, a whisper in our ears. Warning or threat, guardian or tormentor. The distinction blurs a little more each day. I've started to notice things about the world I never saw before. The way water moves, with purpose and memory. The plants pushing through cracks in the sidewalk, more resilient than the concrete that tries to contain them. The ancient patterns repeating all around us, for those with eyes to see. My colleagues comment on the change in me. Calmer, they say, more grounded. That camping trip must have done you good, my boss remarked last week. If only she knew. At night, before sleep, I take my spoonful of Maggie's medicine and whisper a name I once feared but now embrace. Trussum Pond. The syllables taste of copper and earth and time, and somewhere in a Delaware swamp, I know she hears me. My ancestor's victim. My reluctant protector. My fate. I am the last of Thomas Mercer's line, but perhaps not the end of it. Something new grows from those blood-stained waters, something neither fully human nor fully other. Like the cypress trees with their roots in water and branches in air, I exist in two worlds now. Eventually, the swamp will reclaim what belongs to it. Whether through me or through some future generation, the cycle will complete. Blood will answer blood. Justice or vengeance. Another distinction that matters less each day. Until then, Rex and I wait, caught between urban life and ancient magic. And when we walk in the city parks, we always pause by the ponds, however small or manicured. The water recognizes us, rippling in acknowledgement. And sometimes, if the light is right, I catch a glimpse of white hair beneath the surface, a face ancient and patient, watching and waiting. For what is time to the dead? What is distance to a spirit bound to water? Maggie James found me across generations and state lines. Her persistence outlasted my ancestor's crime, his life, his legacy. In the end, she reclaimed what was taken. Not through violence, but through transformation. I am still Elliot Mercer. But I am becoming something else too. Something with roots like the cypress and memory like the water. Something that understands both the hunter and the hunted, the chaser and the chased. The ranger calls sometimes, checking on me. I think he knows more than he says, has seen this process before. The swamp always calls its own, he told me last time. Not a warning anymore, but a simple truth. And in my dreams, Maggie James no longer pursues me. Instead, we walk the misty shores of Trussum Pond together. Her teaching, me learning. The herbal lore of centuries, the secret language of water and wood, the proper offerings for ancient things that still hunger. Your blood demanded justice, she told me in last night's dream, her voice like moving water. But your spirit offered reconciliation. Few have done the same. I woke with tears on my face and the taste of pond water in my mouth. Rex whined softly, pressing his warm body against mine in comfort or protection. I couldn't tell which. The clay pot sits on my bedside table, a constant reminder of what happened and what's still to come. My passport to another world. My tether to powers older than cities or nations or the name Mercer itself. I am the last of my line. But perhaps also the first of something new, something born of guilt and retribution and strange swamp medicine. Not quite human, not quite spirit, but a bridge between worlds that were never meant to be separate. The people who killed Maggie James feared what they didn't understand. They feared her connection to the land, her knowledge of its secrets, her power that didn't conform to their rules. In drowning her, they thought to sever that connection. They failed. Water doesn't forget. The swamp remembers. And through me, Maggie James will return to Trussam Pond not as victim, but as victor. I feel her sometimes, looking out through my eyes at the city that would have bewildered her in life. Learning through me as I once learned through books. A symbiosis neither of us expected, but both now accept. There are other places like Trussam Pond across America. Liminal spaces where the boundary between worlds thins. Other spirits like Maggie James, wronged and restless. Other bloodlines marked by the consequences of their ancestors' actions. I sense them now, like distant radio signals. Perhaps that is my purpose, to walk between worlds, to witness, to remember, to ensure that the crimes of the past are not forgotten, even as their perpetrators try to erase them from history. Or perhaps I'm simply the final payment of a debt long overdue, the last Mercer, completing the cycle begun by the first to wrong Maggie James. Either way, I am no longer afraid. The nightmare that chased me all my life has caught me at last. And in being caught, I found not an ending, but a transformation. Not death, but a different kind of life. Rex understands. He watches the bathroom door on those nights when black water seeps beneath it. Not with terror now, but with respectful distance. He no longer growls at the presence in our home, but acknowledges it with a tilt of his head. An animal's acceptance of mysteries beyond human comprehension. And when we return to Trussam Pond, as we inevitably will, he'll walk beside me into the mist and the memory, loyal to the end. Whatever end that may be. My name is Elliot Mercer. I am 34 years old, and I belong to Trussam Pond now, to its black waters and ancient trees, to its mist and memory and magic, to Maggie James, the swamp hag, my ancestor's victim, my reluctant guardian, myself. My name is Marcus Holloway. I'm 34 years old. This happened in October 2024, and not a day goes by that I don't relive the nightmare in my mind. I've always been the outdoorsy type, the guy friends call when they want to know what gear to buy or which trails to hike. After my divorce was finalized that summer, I decided a solo camping trip was exactly what I needed to clear my head. My therapist had suggested reconnecting with myself, whatever that meant. I figured reconnecting with nature was close enough. I chose Blackbird State Forest in Delaware because it was secluded, but not completely off-grid. The 6,000-acre wilderness seemed perfect, remote enough to feel alone with my thoughts, but established enough that I wouldn't be completely cut off from civilization if something went wrong. The forest is tucked away in the central part of the state, not far from Smyrna. Most tourists overlook it in favor of Delaware's beaches, which was fine by me. I wanted solitude. I'd planned a 5-day trek that would take me through the less-traveled northern section of the forest, setting up camp at different spots each night. The autumn colors were at their peak, brilliant reds and golds against the deep green of the pines. During the day, it was postcard perfect. At night, well, that's when things started to change. The first day went exactly as planned. I parked my truck at the Tie-Boat Track trailhead, double-checked my pack, and headed into the woods. The trail was well marked, winding through stands of oak and hickory trees. I felt the tension of the past 6 months melting away with each step. By late afternoon, I'd reached my first campsite near one of the forest's small ponds. I set up my tent, collected firewood, and prepared a simple dinner over my portable stove. That first night, I slept better than I had in months. No tossing and turning, no checking my phone, no racing thoughts about the divorce papers and dividing up possessions. Just me, my sleeping bag, and the night sounds of the forest. Day 2 was when I first noticed something odd. I'd been following the map I'd downloaded, a detailed trail map that showed all the official paths through the forest. But around midday, I came across a narrow trail that wasn't marked. It veered off from the main path and disappeared into a particularly dense section of forest. I checked my GPS, which showed I was exactly where I should be, but this side trail definitely wasn't on any map. Curiosity got the better of me. I figured I'd follow it for 10 minutes or so just to see where it led, and then backtrack to the main trail. The path was barely visible in places, overgrown with brambles and fallen leaves, but it was definitely man-made. Someone had cleared this trail, even if it wasn't official. After about 15 minutes of hiking, the narrow path opened into a small clearing. In the center stood the remnants of a stone foundation, just a rectangle of crumbling rock walls about 20 inches high. I guessed it had been a cabin or small homestead at some point, though it must have been abandoned for decades. What caught my eye was a crudely carved wooden sign hammered into one of the nearby trees. It read, "Hollow's Keep," in rough, weathered letters. The sign looked old, the wood grayed with age, but something about it made the hair on the back of my neck stand up. I took a few photos with my phone, thinking I'd look up the name later. As I was about to leave, I noticed something else. A small cairn of rocks stacked in the corner of the old foundation. It seemed too deliberately placed to be random. I approached it and saw that the rocks were arranged around what looked like a small opening in the ground. Not quite a cave, but definitely a hollow space that went under the foundation. Common sense told me to leave it alone. But I'd come out here looking for something, hadn't I? Some kind of revelation or clarity that would help me move forward with my life. I knelt down and shined my flashlight into the opening. The beam caught what looked like the corner of a metal box. I reached in, feeling around until my fingers closed around cold metal. With some effort, I pulled out an old tin box, about the size of a hardcover book. It was rusted around the edges, but intact. I shouldn't have opened it. I know that now. Inside was a small leather-bound journal, its pages yellowed and brittle. I flipped it open carefully and found dated entries from 1887. The handwriting was tight and precise, though faded in places. I skimmed the first few pages, which detailed the daily life of someone named Thomas Blackwood, apparently the owner of a small homestead in what was now the state forest. The early entries were mundane, reports of crops planted, weather conditions, visits to town. But as I flipped through, the entries became increasingly disturbing. Blackwood wrote about hearing whispers in the woods, about local children who had gone missing, about something he called the Hollow Man, that he claimed lived in the deeper parts of the forest. The final entry, dated November 18, 1887, read, "It comes for me tonight. I have seen its shadow moving between the trees. I have sealed away the artifact as the old woman instructed, but I fear it is too late. If anyone finds this journal, leave this place. What walks here is not of God's creation." Below that final entry was a crude drawing of a tall, impossibly thin figure with elongated limbs and no distinguishable face, just a blank oval where features should be. I closed the journal, my hands shaking slightly. It was just the ramblings of some isolated settler, I told myself, probably driven half-mad by solitude and hard living. I put the journal back in the box and was about to return it to its hiding place when I noticed something else inside. A small burlap pouch cinched with twine. Again, I should have left it alone. But I didn't. Inside the pouch was a small carved figurine, about 3 inches tall, made from some dark wood I couldn't identify. It depicted the same elongated figure from the drawing, with spindly limbs and a featureless head. The craftsmanship was crude but effective, giving the figure an unsettling appearance. Tiny symbols I didn't recognize were carved into its base. I studied it for a moment, then quickly returned it to the pouch. Something about it felt wrong in my hand, almost as if it were vibrating slightly, though I told myself it was just my imagination. I placed everything back in the box, returned it to its hiding place, and quickly left the clearing. By the time I rejoined the main trail, the sun was lower in the sky than I'd expected. I'd spent more time at the old foundation than I'd realized. I picked up my pace, wanting to reach my planned camping spot before dark. As I hiked, I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being watched. Several times I stopped and turned around, certain I'd hear footsteps behind me, but there was never anything there. Just trees shifting in the autumn breeze and the occasional scurrying of small animals in the underbrush. I reached my second campsite just as dusk was settling over the forest. It was a small clearing near Tyboat Branch, one of the streams that ran through the forest. I set up my tent, gathered firewood, and tried to put the strange discovery out of my mind. That night, I had trouble sleeping. The wind had picked up, causing the branches to scrape against each other with an eerie, almost human sound. I tossed and turned, drifting in and out of unsettling dreams where I was being pursued through endless woods by something I couldn't quite see. I woke suddenly in the middle of the night, heart pounding. At first, I wasn't sure what had disturbed me. Then I heard it, a soft whispering sound coming from just outside my tent. It wasn't the wind in the trees. This was different, more rhythmic, almost like someone muttering under their breath. I lay perfectly still, listening. The whispers continued, circling my tent slowly. They were too quiet to make out words, just a continuous sibilant sound that made my skin crawl. I reached for my flashlight but hesitated to turn it on. Some primal instinct told me that whatever was out there, I didn't want to draw its attention. After what felt like hours, the whispering faded. I eventually drifted back to sleep, convincing myself it had just been the stream or some nocturnal animal. The next morning, I awoke to find the campsite undisturbed. No footprints, no signs that anything or anyone had been near my tent during the night. I should have been relieved, but instead, I felt increasingly uneasy. I broke camp quickly and continued on my planned route, though I couldn't shake the strange tension that had settled over me. As I hiked that third day, the weather began to change. The clear autumn sky gave way to low, heavy clouds, and the temperature dropped noticeably. By early afternoon, a fine mist had settled over the forest, reducing visibility and giving the woods an otherworldly quality. The bright fall colors were muted now, everything draped in gray. I checked my GPS repeatedly, unsettled by how the forest seemed to change in the mist. Familiar landmarks looked different, and twice I found myself off course, having to backtrack to the main trail. My phone's battery was draining faster than it should have, despite being in power-saving mode. Around mid-afternoon, I came across another hiker, the first person I'd seen since entering the forest. She was sitting on a fallen log beside the trail, adjusting the laces on her hiking boots. She looked to be in her 50s, with silver-streaked hair pulled back in a practical ponytail and the weathered face of someone who spent a lot of time outdoors. "Afternoon," I called out as I approached, not wanting to startle her. She looked up, her expression neutral. "Afternoon," she replied, her voice rougher than I expected. "You're a ways from the main trails." "Just doing a multi-day trek," I explained, planning to loop back to the Tybout trailhead by Friday. She nodded slowly, studying me. "Camping alone?" "Yeah, needed some time to clear my head." She finished with her boot and stood up. "You might want to change your plans. Weather's turning worse than forecast. They're calling for heavy rain tonight, maybe thunderstorms." I glanced at the sky. The clouds did look darker than before. "Thanks for the heads up. I've got good rain gear, though. Should be fine." "Your call." She shouldered her small day pack. "Just be careful around Hollow's Keep. That area gets dangerous when it rains. Ground's not stable." I felt a chill that had nothing to do with the dropping temperature. "Hollow's Keep? You mean that old foundation off trail?" She tilted her head slightly. "So, you found it. Curious place, isn't it?" "Yeah, I came across it yesterday. Found an old journal buried there. Mentioned someone called the Hollow Man." At that, her expression changed, a flicker of something, alarm, recognition, crossing her face before she controlled it. "Just local folklore," she said dismissively. "These old forests are full of stories." The journal seemed pretty convinced it was real. I don't know why I pushed the point. Something about her reaction made me want to see what she knew. "Listen," she said, stepping closer, her voice dropping. "This forest has been here a long time. Longer than the state, longer than the country. People have lived and died here for centuries. Some stories exist for a reason, to warn people." She paused, then added, "You said you found a journal. Nothing else?" I hesitated. Something made me reluctant to mention the figurine. "Just the journal," I lied. She studied my face for a long moment, then nodded. "Best leave old things where you find them. Anyway, I should get moving if I want to be out before dark. Safe travels." She stepped around me and continued down the trail in the direction I'd come from. "Wait," I called after her. "What's your name?" She paused, but didn't turn around. "Eleanor Blackwood," she said, then continued walking until the mist swallowed her figure. Blackwood, the same surname as the journal's author. It had to be a coincidence, I told myself. Or maybe she was a descendant who knew the local history. Either way, our encounter left me deeply unsettled. I continued hiking, but the weather deteriorated faster than I expected. By late afternoon, the mist had turned to a steady rain, and thunder rumbled in the distance. I decided to make camp earlier than planned, finding a relatively sheltered spot beneath a stand of thick pines. Setting up the tent in the rain was a miserable experience. By the time I crawled inside, I was soaked through despite my rain gear. I changed into dry clothes and used my camp stove to heat some water for a packet of dehydrated stew. Outside, the rain intensified, drumming against the tent fly. As I ate my dinner, I couldn't stop thinking about the encounter with Eleanor Blackwood and the strange coincidence of her name. I dug out my phone to check if I had enough signal to search for information about Hollow's Keep or the Blackwood family, but there was no service at all now. The battery was down to 18% despite having charged it fully the night before. I turned it off to conserve power and tried to settle in for the night, listening to the rain and occasional thunder. Sleep came fitfully, in broken segments punctuated by strange dreams. In one particularly vivid sequence, I was back at the old foundation, but it wasn't a ruin. It was a complete cabin, with lamplight glowing in the windows. A figure stood in the doorway, impossibly tall and thin, beckoning me closer. I woke with a start, my heart racing. The rain had stopped, but something else had woken me. A sound outside the tent. Not whispering this time, but a slow, deliberate scratching, as if someone were drawing their fingernails across the tent fabric. I lay frozen, listening as the scratching moved slowly around the perimeter of the tent. When it reached the door, it stopped. There was a long moment of silence, then the zipper of my tent door began to move, slowly pulling upward. I lunged for my flashlight and clicked it on, aiming the beam at the door. The zipper stopped moving. Outside, I could see nothing but darkness and the vague shapes of trees. No figure, no person, nothing that could have been pulling the zipper. "Who's there?" I called out, my voice shakier than I intended. No answer came, just the dripping of rainwater from the trees and the distant call of an owl. I didn't sleep again that night. I sat up, flashlight in one hand and my hunting knife in the other, watching the door until the first gray light of dawn filtered through the tent walls. When I finally worked up the courage to unzip the tent and look outside, I found no footprints in the soft earth, no sign that anyone had been there. But carved into the trunk of the nearest pine tree, fresh enough that sap still oozed from the cuts, was a crude symbol. The same elongated figure from the journal and the wooden figurine. That was enough. I broke camp quickly, abandoning my original plan. I was going to hike straight back to my truck and get out of Blackbird Forest. The whole experience had turned from a peaceful retreat into something unsettling, and I wanted no more part of it. I packed everything except my tent, which was still too wet to roll up properly. As I was shaking it out, something fell from one of the pockets, the small wooden figurine from the tin box. I stared at it in disbelief. I had left it at the foundation, I was sure of it. I had put it back in the pouch, back in the tin, back in the hole. Yet here it was, somehow in my tent. I almost threw it away then, hurled it as far into the forest as I could. But something stopped me. A strange, almost superstitious feeling that discarding it would make things worse. Instead, I wrapped it in a bandana and stuffed it deep in my pack. The hike back should have taken me about 6 hours, according to my map. But within the first hour, I knew something was wrong. The trails weren't matching up with my map or GPS. Landmarks I should have recognized were missing, and paths veered in directions they shouldn't have. My compass was spinning erratically, the needle swinging in complete circles rather than pointing north. By midday, I had to admit the truth. I was lost. The forest that had seemed so navigable just days before had become a maze of identical-looking trees and misleading paths. The sun was hidden behind clouds, giving me no way to orient myself. My phone's GPS kept showing me in different locations, jumping miles between readings. As the day wore on and my frustration mounted, I began to feel that same sensation of being watched. Several times I spun around, certain I'd catch someone following me, but there was never anyone there, just the silent trees and the occasional rustle of wildlife. Then, in the late afternoon, I found myself back at the old foundation of Hollow's Keep. It wasn't possible. I'd been walking away from it all day, yet somehow I'd circled back. The crumbling stone walls were just as I'd left them, the wooden sign still nailed to the tree. But the cairn of rocks covering the hiding place of the tin box had been disturbed, the rocks scattered. As I stood there, trying to process what was happening, I heard a voice behind me. "You took something that doesn't belong to you." I whirled around to find Eleanor Blackwood standing at the edge of the clearing. She was wearing the same hiking clothes as before, but something about her seemed different, harder, more intense. "I didn't take anything," I said automatically. Her eyes narrowed. "Don't lie to me. I can feel it. You have the totem." I took a step back. "I don't know what you're talking about." "The carved figure. My ancestor made it to bind what lives in these woods. It belongs here, in this place." She took a step forward. "Give it back, and maybe you can still leave." "How did it end up in my tent?" I demanded. "Did you put it there?" She laughed, a harsh sound without humor. "I've never touched it. None of us do. It finds those who disturb its resting place. It wants to be found, and then it wants to feed." "What the hell are you talking about?" I was backing away now, moving toward the trail. "The Hollow Man. My family has kept it contained for generations. The totem binds it to this small area of the forest, keeps it from ranging wider. Thomas Blackwood sacrificed himself to create that binding, and we've maintained it ever since." Her voice was flat, matter of fact. "Every few decades, someone like you comes along, curious, disrespectful. They take what isn't theirs, and it follows." "This is insane," I said. "You're saying there's some monster in these woods? That's just stories to scare kids." Her expression darkened. "It was here before the trees, before people. It hungers, it empties. Once it marks you, it won't stop until it's taken everything that makes you who you are. Then it wears your skin for a time, until that skin rots, and it needs another." As she spoke, the light seemed to dim around us, though the sun was still above the horizon. A cold wind swept through the clearing, carrying a scent like wet earth and decay. "Give me the totem," she said, extending her hand. "Let me return it to its place, and you might still have a chance to leave these woods." Part of me wanted to refuse, to turn and run. But a deeper instinct, something primal and focused on survival, made me reach for my pack. I dug out the bandana-wrapped figurine and held it out. Eleanor approached cautiously, not reaching for it directly. Instead, she opened a small leather pouch hanging from her belt and nodded for me to drop the figure inside. I did, relieved to be rid of it. "Now go," she said, cinching the pouch closed. "Take the eastern trail. Don't stop, don't look back. If you hear whispers or see shadows moving against the trees, run. It's already tasted you. It may follow." "What about you?" I asked. "This is my family's burden," she said simply. "We keep the old bargains. Now go." I didn't need to be told again. I turned and hurried down the eastern path she'd indicated. This time, the trail seemed more familiar, more aligned with my map. My compass began working normally again, consistently pointing north. As I hiked, the forest grew darker, twilight approaching faster than it should have. I quickened my pace, pushing myself hard. I didn't want to spend another night in those woods. About an hour into my trek, I heard it, the whispering. Just like outside my tent the night before, but louder now, more insistent. I couldn't make out words, but the sound carried meaning nonetheless. Hunger, anticipation, malice. I broke into a jog, then a full run when the whispers grew louder. My pack bounced painfully against my back, but I didn't slow down. The trail ahead was growing dimmer by the minute as night settled over the forest. I don't know how long I ran. Time seemed to stretch and compress strangely. My lungs burned and my legs ached, but the whispering kept pace behind me, sometimes seeming to come from all directions at once. Then, ahead through the trees, I saw headlights on a road, the parking area where I'd left my truck. Relief flooded through me, giving me a final burst of energy. I sprinted the last few hundred yards, crashing through the underbrush beside the trail in my haste to reach safety. I burst into the small gravel parking lot, gasping for breath. My truck sat where I'd left it, alone in the lot. I fumbled with my keys, hands shaking so badly I could hardly get them into the lock. Finally, the door opened, and I threw my pack inside and climbed in, slamming the door behind me. For a moment, I just sat there, catching my breath. The doors locked, the keys in the ignition, but the engine not yet started. I'd made it. I was safe. Then I looked in the rearview mirror. Standing at the edge of the forest, barely visible in the deepening darkness, was a figure. Not Eleanor Blackwood. This was taller, impossibly thin, with limbs that seemed too long for its body. It stood perfectly still, watching the truck. Its face, if it had one, was hidden in shadow. I started the engine with trembling hands and peeled out of the parking lot. Gravel spraying from my tires. I didn't slow down until I hit the main highway, and even then, I drove well above the speed limit until I reached the outskirts of Smyrna. I checked into the first motel I saw, a shabby roadside place that nonetheless seemed like luxury after my time in the forest. I showered for nearly an hour, trying to wash away the feeling of being watched, of being hunted. That night, despite my exhaustion, I barely slept. Every sound from outside, passing cars, the ice machine down the hall, other guests returning to their rooms, made me tense, expecting whispers, expecting the slow scratch of fingers against the door. In the morning, I checked out early and drove straight home to Newark. I told myself it was over, that whatever strangeness I'd experienced in Blackbird Forest was behind me. Eleanor Blackwood had taken back the figurine. The Hollow Man, if it existed outside of local legend, was bound to its small territory again. Yet, in the days that followed, things changed. Small things at first. I'd enter a room and find objects not where I'd left them. My phone would drain completely overnight despite being plugged in. I'd wake to find my front door unlocked, though I distinctly remembered securing it before bed. Then the whispers started again, just at the edge of hearing, usually when I was alone or trying to sleep. Like someone standing just behind me, muttering words I couldn't quite make out. A week after returning from the forest, I woke in the middle of the night to find my bedroom window open, curtains billowing in the breeze. A window I was certain had been closed and locked when I went to bed. As I got up to close it, I saw something on the windowsill that made my blood run cold. A small wooden figurine, crude and ancient-looking, of an impossibly tall, thin figure with elongated limbs. I'm not in my house anymore. I'm writing this from a motel room 2 states away. I don't know if distance will help. Sometimes I think I see it. A tall, thin shadow at the edge of my vision. Sometimes I hear the whispers growing louder. I tried calling the Delaware Forest Service, asking about Blackbird Forest and Eleanor Blackwood. The ranger I spoke with said there was no employee or regular visitor by that name. When I described her, he grew quiet, then said, "That sounds like Eleanor Blackwood, all right, but she couldn't have been who you met. Eleanor Blackwood was the local historian and volunteer guide for the forest. She passed away 3 years ago. I don't know what's happening to me. I don't know if what's following me is some local predator using folklore as a cover, or if there really is something ancient and hungry in those woods. All I know is that I haven't slept properly in weeks. I've lost weight. Food tastes like ash in my mouth. And sometimes, when I catch a glimpse of myself in a mirror or window, my reflection seems wrong, thinner, elongated, hungry. If you're planning a trip to Blackbird State Forest, stay on the marked trails. Don't explore old ruins. Don't take things that don't belong to you. And if you hear whispers in the woods, run. Run, and don't look back. Because I think it's too late for me now. The whispers are inside my head. And I'm so hungry. My name is Rebecca Langley. I'm 34 years old. This happened in October 2024. I've always been a city person. Growing up in Philadelphia, my idea of the outdoors was the well-manicured paths of Fairmount Park. But when my girlfriend Elise suggested we take a weekend camping trip to disconnect and reconnect, I reluctantly agreed. She'd been talking about Blackbird State Forest in Delaware for months, how it was just remote enough to feel like an escape but still accessible for beginners like me. "It'll be romantic," she promised, her blue eyes gleaming with excitement. "Just you, me, and the stars." Elise was an experienced hiker. She'd grown up in rural Vermont and had spent summers as a trail guide. Her lithe frame and sun-kissed skin spoke of someone comfortable in the wilderness. Meanwhile, my pale complexion and office-softened muscles betrayed my urban lifestyle. "We won't go anywhere too challenging," she assured me as we packed our gear into her weathered Subaru Outback. "There's a secluded spot near Tyboat Track that not many people know about. It'll be perfect." It was a crisp autumn day when we set out. The trees along the highway flashed crimson and gold, and I felt a flicker of excitement despite my reservations. Maybe this would be good for us. Things had been tense lately. Subtle arguments, lingering silences, sleeping with our backs to each other. Perhaps Elise was right. Maybe we just needed to disconnect from the digital world and reconnect with each other. The drive took about an hour and a half. As Philadelphia's skyline disappeared in the rearview mirror, the landscape gradually shifted to rolling farmland, then dense woodland. We turned off the main road onto progressively narrower lanes until we reached the forest entrance. Blackbird State Forest seemed pleasant enough upon arrival. A few other cars were parked at the main trailhead, and a helpful ranger named Dave gave us a map, pointing out the marked trails and camping areas. "If you're looking for privacy, there's a nice spot about 3 miles in on the Kearney Mill Trail," he suggested, circling it on our map. "Beautiful views of the mill pond, especially at sunset." Elise shot me a knowing glance. This was exactly what she'd been hoping for. "Just be careful," Dave added, his weathered face growing serious. "Stay on the marked trails. We had some hikers get lost last month when they went exploring off-path. Took us 2 days to find them." "We'll be careful," Elise promised, already shouldering her backpack. Mine felt impossibly heavy as I awkwardly hoisted it onto my back. Elise had insisted we pack light, but her definition of the term seemed to include an improbable amount of gear. Still, I didn't complain. I wanted to prove I could handle this. The trail started easily enough, a well-maintained path winding through tall oaks and maples. The autumn foliage was breathtaking, leaves cascading around us like golden confetti. For the first mile, we encountered other hikers, mostly day trippers who nodded politely as they passed. But as we continued deeper, the forest changed. The trees grew closer together, their branches forming a dense canopy that dimmed the afternoon light. The trail narrowed, sometimes nearly disappearing under fallen leaves and protruding roots. The cheerful sounds of distant voices faded, replaced by the eerie silence of deep woods, occasionally punctuated by unidentifiable rustling in the underbrush. "Are you sure this is still the right trail?" I asked after we'd been walking for over 2 hours. According to the map, we should have reached the camping area by now. Elise frowned, studying the increasingly obsolete paper guide. "I think we missed a turn somewhere. The trail should have forked about half a mile back." I checked my phone, hoping for GPS guidance, but there was no signal. "Of course. Let's backtrack a bit," Elise suggested. "We can't be far off." But as we turned around, something strange happened. The path we'd just followed seemed different. Wider in some places, narrower in others. Trees I didn't remember passing now lined the trail. A sense of disorientation washed over me. "Elise, does this look the same to you?" She didn't answer immediately, her eyes scanning our surroundings with growing concern. "It should be fine," she finally said, but her voice lacked conviction. "Forests can play tricks on your perception. Let's just keep moving." The afternoon light was fading fast as we continued our retreat. My watch said it was only 4:30 p.m., but the forest was already cloaked in twilight shadows. October days were short, but this darkness felt premature, unnatural. "We need to find somewhere to camp soon," Elise admitted, "even if it's not the spot we planned." As if in answer to her words, the path suddenly opened into a small clearing. A fallen log created a natural bench beside a flat area perfect for pitching our tent. A circle of stones suggested others had used this spot for fires before. "This will do," Elise decided. "We can figure out where we are in the morning." Relieved to shed my backpack, I began helping with camp setup. Elise assembled our tent with practiced efficiency while I gathered firewood from the edges of the clearing. As I ventured a short distance into the trees, I noticed stone formations that seemed too regular to be natural, like the remnants of an old foundation. I mentioned it to Elise when I returned. "This area has a lot of history," she said, arranging kindling for our fire. There were mills and homesteads throughout these woods in the 1800s. Most were abandoned after a series of deaths and disappearances. Deaths and disappearances? I paused in my work. "You're making that up to scare me." Elise grinned, but it didn't quite reach her eyes. "Look it up when we get back to civilization. In 1887, an entire family, the Carrolls, vanished from their homestead. The only trace was a journal belonging to the mother, Elizabeth Carroll. The final entry just said, 'It's watching us from the trees.'" A chill ran down my spine that had nothing to do with the dropping temperature. "Thanks for the bedtime story." "Just local history," Elise shrugged, lighting the fire. The flames caught quickly, casting our small clearing in flickering orange light. As darkness settled completely around us, the fire became our world. Everything beyond its glow faded to impenetrable black. We heated a simple dinner of freeze-dried chili and shared a flask of whiskey. The food was bland but warming, and the alcohol helped ease my growing unease. As we sat side by side on the log, Elise's shoulder pressed against mine, I found myself relaxing for the first time all day. "See, this isn't so bad," she murmured, her breath visible in the cooling air. I had to admit she was right. There was something primal and satisfying about sitting by a fire in the wilderness with someone you care about. The tensions between us seemed to dissipate as we shared stories and pointed out constellations appearing in the patches of sky visible through the canopy. It was while identifying Orion that I first noticed something odd. Between the trees at the edge of our clearing, just beyond the firelight's reach, I thought I saw movement. A shadow darker than the surrounding darkness, roughly human-shaped but too tall, too thin. I blinked, and it was gone. "Did you see that?" I whispered. "See what?" Elise followed my gaze but saw nothing unusual. "Nothing. Just my eyes playing tricks, I guess." We turned in shortly after, the day's exertion catching up with us. Our tent was small but comfortable, our sleeping bags arranged close together. Elise fell asleep almost immediately, her breathing deep and regular, but I lay awake, listening to the sounds of the forest. Without the fire, the darkness was absolute. The noises were subtle at first, the normal creaking of trees and rustling of nocturnal animals, but slowly other sounds emerged. A rhythmic tapping, like fingernails on wood. A low, sustained note that might have been wind through hollow trees but sounded disturbingly like distant singing. And once, a sound like my name being whispered just outside our tent. I told myself it was my imagination, overtired nerves interpreting natural phenomena through a lens of anxiety. But when a twig snapped loudly, as if under a deliberate footstep just feet from our tent, I couldn't help but shake Elise awake. "Someone's out there," I hissed. She listened for a moment, then sighed. "It's just forest sounds, Becca. Animals, wind, settling trees. It feels like we're being watched." Elise propped herself up on one elbow. In the faint moonlight filtering through the tent fabric, her expression was unreadable. "Do you want me to go look?" "No." I grabbed her arm. "Don't go out there." "Then try to sleep. Everything seems scarier at night." She was right, of course. I was being childish. I forced myself to close my eyes, focusing on Elise's steady breathing beside me. Eventually, exhaustion overcame fear, and I drifted into uneasy sleep. The dream started pleasantly enough. Elise and I were walking through sun-dappled woods, hand in hand. But gradually the sunlight dimmed, and Elise walked faster, always just ahead of me. I called to her, but she didn't turn, moving with a strange jerky gait I'd never seen before. When she finally stopped and turned, her face wasn't her face at all but a grotesque mask of stretched skin and too wide smile. I woke with a start, heart pounding. The tent was empty beside me. "Elise," I called, my voice embarrassingly small in the darkness. No answer. I fumbled for my phone, using its dim light to confirm what I already knew. Elise was gone, her sleeping bag open and empty. Her boots were missing too. A glance at my watch showed 3:17 a.m. Where could she have gone? The bathroom, I told myself. We'd dug a makeshift latrine a short distance from camp. But wouldn't she have taken the flashlight for that? I found the flashlight still in her pack. Fighting rising panic, I pulled on my boots and jacket and unzipped the tent. The clearing outside was transformed by night, familiar shapes rendered alien by darkness and mist that had risen while we slept. The remains of our fire were cold ashes. "Elise!" I called louder, sweeping the flashlight beam across the clearing. "This isn't funny." A rustling came from the trees to my left. I swung the light toward the sound. "Elise, is that you?" The light caught a figure standing between two distant trees. Relief flooded through me, quickly followed by irritation. "What are you doing out here? You scared me half to—" The words died in my throat as the figure stepped forward. It was Elise, yet somehow wrong. She moved jerkily, just like in my dream, her normally fluid grace replaced by awkward, puppet-like movements. Her head was tilted at an unnatural angle. "Had to see," she said, her voice flat and unfamiliar. "Had to know." "Know what? Elise, are you okay?" She took another step forward, entering the edge of my flashlight beam. I stifled a scream. Her face was pale as death, eyes wide and unblinking. A thin line of dark liquid, blood, trickled from her nose. But worst of all was her expression. Blank. Empty, like someone had erased everything that made her Elise. "She's in the old house," Elise said, her voice monotone. "Waiting. Always waiting." "Who's waiting?" "Elise, you're scaring me." "Elizabeth." The name came out like a hiss. "Elizabeth Carroll." A chill ran down my spine as I remembered Elise's campfire story about the vanished family. "Let's go back to the tent," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. "You're sleepwalking or something." I reached for her hand, but she jerked away violently. "Don't touch me," she screamed, her voice suddenly shrill. "She'll know. She'll come." Then, as abruptly as her outburst began, Elise's demeanor changed. Her posture straightened, Her expression softened. "I'm sorry," she said, sounding more like herself. "I had a nightmare and needed some air. Did I wake you?" I stared at her, speechless. Had I imagined the whole bizarre encounter? But no, there was still dried blood under her nose. "Elise, what happened just now?" She frowned. "What do you mean?" "I woke up, couldn't get back to sleep, decided to stretch my legs." "You were acting strange, saying weird things about someone named Elizabeth Carroll." At the mention of the name, Elise's eyes widened slightly. "The woman from the story. I don't remember saying anything about her." "Let's just go back to the tent," I said. Suddenly, desperate, century-old spell had. When I had completed the circuit, I stopped, drew a deep breath, and pulled out my pocket knife. "Blood and will," the journal had said. I pricked my finger, letting several drops fall to the earth. "With my blood and my will," I said, improvising words that felt right, "I strengthen this barrier. What is bound here stays here. Elizabeth Carroll, the Watchers, all of you. This is where you remain." The effect was immediate and terrifying. The ground beneath us trembled. The air rippled like disturbed water, and both Elizabeth and the shadow creatures screamed, a unified howl of rage and frustration that made me cover my ears. The Watchers threw themselves against the barrier with renewed fury, but now, instead of making progress, they seemed to be pushed back, forced to retreat toward the house. Elizabeth, too, was affected, Elise's body convulsing as she fought against the reinforced binding. "What have you done?" she snarled. Her voice distorting between Elise's familiar tones and something older, colder. "Given you a choice," I said, approaching her cautiously, "you can fight this binding forever, or you can let Elise go and accept what you are." "And what am I?" she spat. "A guardian," I said, the word coming from nowhere yet feeling absolutely right. "You bound yourself here to contain these things. You've kept them from spreading beyond this forest for over a century. That's not nothing, Elizabeth. That's a purpose." Something shifted in her expression, a flicker of the woman she'd once been, perhaps. "I just wanted to be free," she whispered. "I know, and I'm sorry. But your freedom can't come at the cost of Elise's life or the safety of others." The shadows were retreating now, flowing back into the house like a tide returning to the sea. The pressure in the air was lessening, the unnatural darkness lifting. Elizabeth looked at the house, then back at me. Indecision warred on Elise's features. If I release her, I return to the half-life, watching, waiting, alone. "Not completely alone," I said. "I know about you now. I can make sure others know, too. Your story, your sacrifice. It won't be forgotten again." She was silent for a long moment. Then, with a sigh that seemed to come from somewhere far deeper than Elise's lungs, she nodded. "Stand back." I retreated several steps, watching anxiously as Elizabeth closed Elise's eyes. A shudder ran through Elise's body, followed by another, more violent one. Her back arched, her mouth opened in a silent scream. For one terrible moment I thought I'd made a terrible mistake, that Elise was dying before my eyes. Then a pale mist seeped from her pores, from her mouth and eyes, gathering in the air before her. It swirled and condensed, taking on a vaguely human shape, the ghostly outline of a woman in 19th century dress, her face gaunt but dignified. Elise collapsed to the ground like a puppet with cut strings. I rushed to her side, cradling her head. "Elise, can you hear me?" Her eyelids fluttered. When they opened, they were her eyes again, the familiar blue I knew so well. "Becca," she murmured. "What happened? Where are we?" Before I could answer, the spectral form of Elizabeth Carroll drifted toward us. Elise gasped, pressing closer to me in fear. "Thank you," Elizabeth's voice whispered, barely audible, "for reminding me of my purpose." Then she turned, floating toward the house where the last of the shadow creatures had retreated. At the threshold, she paused, looking back at us one final time. "Leave this place," she said. "Tell them to close the trails near here. No one should come to these woods again." With that, she vanished into the darkness of the ruined house. For a moment, I thought I heard a clash, like combat between beings I couldn't comprehend. Then, silence. Elise was shaking in my arms. "Becca, what the hell just happened? Who was that? Why can't I remember how we got here?" "It's complicated," I said, helping her to her feet. "I'll explain everything, but first we need to get out of these woods." Gathering our packs, which had somehow ended up scattered around the clearing, we hurried away from the Carroll house. I kept the journal, tucked safely in my pack, evidence of what had happened and a reminder of the woman who had spent over a century containing a horror few would ever know about. The forest seemed brighter now, less oppressive. We found a marked trail within 15 minutes, and from there made our way back to the ranger station by mid-afternoon. The ranger, Dave, was shocked at our disheveled appearance. "Got lost, did you?" he asked, looking us over with concern. "Happens sometimes, even with good maps." "You could say that," I replied. Then, remembering Elizabeth's final words, "You should close the trails near Tyboot Tract, specifically around the old foundations to the northeast." Dave frowned. "The Carroll place? Nobody's supposed to go there anyway. It's off limits. Dangerous structure, historical preservation, all that." "Well, we ended up there accidentally. It's not safe." He nodded slowly. "I'll mention it to the Park Service. Get some better barriers put up, maybe." As we drove away from Blackbird State Forest, Elise was quiet, staring out the window with a troubled expression. I'd given her the bare minimum explanation that we'd gotten lost, found an old house, and she'd had some kind of episode that I attributed to possible carbon monoxide poisoning from the decaying structure. She seemed to accept this, though I could tell she was disturbed by her missing memories. "I feel like there's something important I'm forgetting," she said as Philadelphia's skyline came into view, "something I was supposed to learn." I thought of Elizabeth Carroll, bound to that clearing for eternity, standing guard against horrors that would have otherwise spread beyond those woods. Of her sacrifice, first unwilling and now chosen. "Maybe some things are better forgotten," I said, reaching over to squeeze her hand. "But I'll remember for both of us." Elise smiled, though confusion still lingered in her eyes. "Next time, let's just go to a hotel with a spa, okay?" "Deal." I never told Elise the full truth of what happened in Blackbird Forest. How could I? It would sound like madness, and why burden her with knowledge of things that exist beyond the comfortable boundaries of our reality? But I kept Elizabeth Carroll's journal. Sometimes, late at night, I read it again, tracing the increasingly desperate entries of a woman who sacrificed her chance at peace to contain an ancient evil. I've considered publishing her story someday, perhaps as fiction, a way to honor her request that she not be forgotten. And I never venture into remote woods anymore. The deeper wilderness holds secrets better left undisturbed, guardians better left to their eternal watch. Sometimes, when I look at the trees lining the highway or filling city parks, I can't help but wonder, what might be watching from their shadows? What ancient things might dwell in the dark spaces between their trunks, held at bay by boundaries both seen and unseen? I pray I never have to find out again. And to be inside our fragile nylon shelter, as if it could protect us from whatever was happening. Elise agreed, but as we turned, a sound froze us in place, a long, keening wail that was neither animal nor human, emanating from deep in the forest. It rose in pitch until it was almost unbearable, then abruptly cut off. "What the hell was that?" I whispered. Elise didn't answer. She was staring into the darkness, her body rigid. "We should go," I said. "Pack up and hike out. Now." "In the dark?" Elise shook her head. "That's how people get lost and die out here. We wait for morning." She was right, logically, but nothing about this situation felt logical anymore. Back in the tent, neither of us could sleep. We lay side by side, listening to the sounds of the forest, which now seemed loaded with malice. Occasionally, Elise would twitch or mutter something unintelligible. Each time, I tensed, afraid she was slipping back into that strange, possessed state. When the first gray light of dawn finally seeped through the tent walls, I nearly cried with relief. We packed quickly, hardly speaking. As Elise rolled up her sleeping bag, I noticed scratches on her arms that hadn't been there the day before. Long, parallel marks like fingernails had been dragged across her skin. "What happened to your arms?" I asked. She glanced down, seeming surprised. "Must have brushed against some thorns last night." But there had been no thorny plants where she'd been standing. We skipped breakfast, both eager to leave this place. As we shouldered our packs, I took one last look at our campsite. The stone remnants I'd noticed yesterday seemed more defined in the morning light, definitely the foundation of some long-abandoned structure. "The Carroll homestead," I murmured. Elise's head snapped toward me. "What did you say?" "Nothing. Let's go." We tried to retrace our steps from the previous day, but nothing looked familiar. The trail that had led us to the clearing seemed to have vanished overnight. Instead, we found ourselves pushing through increasingly dense underbrush, the trees closing in around us. My phone still showed no signal, and even more concerning, the compass app was malfunctioning, the needle spinning wildly in all directions. Elise's physical compass was doing the same. "This isn't right," she muttered, tapping the device. "Something's interfering with it." After an hour of aimless wandering, we stumbled upon what appeared to be an actual trail. It wasn't marked on our map, but it was clearly human-made, too straight and well-defined to be natural. "Should we follow it?" I asked. Elise hesitated. "It's not on the map, but it has to lead somewhere." The trail wound through the oldest part of the forest we'd seen yet. Massive trees that must have been hundreds of years old, their gnarled roots breaking through the soil like arthritic fingers. The foliage was so dense that even though it was morning, we walked in perpetual twilight. We'd been following this new path for perhaps 20 minutes when we came to a clearing much larger than the one where we'd camped. In its center stood a house, or what remained of one. Weathered gray timbers formed the skeleton of a two-story structure, portions of walls still standing, windows gaping like empty eye sockets. Nature had begun reclaiming it. Vines twisted through the framework, and a young tree grew through what must have been the living room. "This can't be right," Elise said, studying our map. "There are no structures marked here." But I knew what we were looking at. "It's the Carroll house, isn't it? From your story." Elise didn't answer. She was staring at the ruined building with an expression I couldn't read. "We should go around," I suggested. "Find another way." "No." Elise's voice had that strange, flat quality again. "We need to go inside." "Are you crazy? That thing looks ready to collapse." But Elise was already moving toward the house, her gait once again taking on that unsettling, puppet-like quality. "Elise, stop!" I ran after her, grabbing her arm. She turned to face me, and I recoiled. Her eyes were glassy, unfocused, her pupils so dilated that her blue irises were nearly swallowed by black. "She's waiting," Elise said in that not her voice. "She's been so lonely." "Who's waiting? Elise, snap out of it." For a moment, confusion crossed her face as if she were fighting against something. "Becca, I can't." Then her expression hardened again, and she wrenched her arm from my grasp with surprising strength. Before I could stop her, she disappeared through the decaying doorway into the shadowed interior of the house. I stood frozen, terror and indecision paralyzing me. Every instinct screamed to run, to find help, to get as far from this place as possible. But I couldn't leave Elise. Taking a deep breath, I followed her into the Carroll house. The interior was in better condition than I expected. While the roof had partially collapsed, letting in shafts of muted daylight, much of the structure remained intact. Rotted furniture still occupied the main room: a table, the remains of chairs, a sideboard with moldering dishware. The air was thick with the smell of decay and something else I couldn't identify. Something sickly sweet and metallic. "Elise!" I called, my voice swallowed by the oppressive silence of the place. A sound from above. Footsteps crossing what remained of the second floor. I located a staircase against the far wall, its steps sagging but seemingly intact. Every part of me protested as I placed my foot on the first step. The wood creaked ominously but held. Slowly, I ascended into the gloom of the upper floor. "Elise, please, let's get out of here." The second floor was divided into what must have been bedrooms. Most of the interior walls had collapsed, creating one large space broken only by support beams and remnants of door frames. Amazingly, a bed frame still stood in one corner, its mattress long gone but its iron framework intact. Beside it was a small table, and on that table sat an object that looked jarringly out of place in the decayed setting. A book, its leather binding weathered but still whole. And beside that book stood Elise, her back to me, staring at something I couldn't see. She kept a record, Elise said without turning, of everything she saw, everything she learned. I approached cautiously. "Who, Elise? Who are you talking about?" Elizabeth Carroll. She knew what lived in these woods, what had always lived here, long before settlers came. I was close enough now to see what Elise was staring at, a crude symbol carved into the wall above where the table stood. It looked like a stick figure but with too many limbs, all bent at unnatural angles. "Elise, you're scaring me. Let's leave this place." She turned then, and I gasped. Her face was streaked with dirt and what looked like blood, her eyes wild. "It's too late," she said, and now her voice sounded like her own again, but filled with terror. "I let her in, Becca. I didn't mean to, but I let her in." "Let who in? What are you talking about?" "Elizabeth. She needed a body. She's been trapped here for so long, waiting for someone suitable." Elise's voice broke. "She's in my head, Becca. I can feel her thoughts, her memories." I reached for her hand, ignoring my fear. "We're getting out of here. Now." But as our fingers touched, a violent tremor ran through Elise's body. She jerked away, her back arching impossibly far, a sound emerging from her throat that no human should be able to make. A high, ululating wail that raised the hair on my arms. Then she collapsed, her body going limp. I caught her before she hit the floor, easing her down. "Elise? Elise, can you hear me?" Her eyes fluttered open, but something was wrong. Her familiar blue eyes had somehow changed. The color darker, the shape subtly different. When she spoke, her voice was lower, with an accent I'd never heard from her before. "Your friend is still here," she said, "but so am I." I scrambled backward. "Who are you?" The thing wearing Elise's face sat up, movements fluid yet wrong, like someone wearing ill-fitting clothes. "You know who I am." "Elizabeth Carroll." She smiled, Elise's features rearranging into an expression I'd never seen on her face, something cold and calculating. "What's left of her? I've been here so long, alone with them." "Them?" Her gaze shifted to the window, where branches from the encroaching forest nearly touched the glass. "The ones who took my family. Who would have taken me if I hadn't found a way to bind myself to this place?" She looked down at Elise's hands, flexing the fingers experimentally. "But it's a half-life, trapped between worlds. I needed a body." Horror washed over me as I realized what she was saying. "You're possessing her." "Sharing," Elizabeth corrected. "For now. Soon she'll fade, and I'll have complete control. Then I can finally leave this cursed place." "Let her go," I demanded, fear giving way to anger. "Whatever happened to you and your family, it's not Elise's fault." Elizabeth's expression on Elise's face hardened. "You don't understand what it's been like, watching, waiting, as decades passed. The loneliness, the hunger for life." As she spoke, the air in the room seemed to thicken. shadows gathering in the corners despite the daylight outside. A low humming began, vibrating through the floorboards. "They're coming," Elizabeth whispered, sudden fear replacing her confidence. "They always come when I try to leave." The humming grew louder, resolving into something like voices, a multitude of them, whispering words just below the threshold of comprehension. The shadows in the corners began to move, stretching toward us with impossible, elongated limbs. "What's happening?" I asked, backing toward the stairs. "The Watchers," Elizabeth said. "The ones who took my family. They want me too. And now, they want your friend." One of the shadow forms detached from the wall, flowing across the floor like ink through water. It rose up before us, taking a vaguely humanoid shape, but wrong. Too tall, too thin, with limbs that bent backward and a head that tilted at an impossible angle. Other shapes followed, emerging from every dark corner of the room, moving with a jerky, insectile grace that made my stomach turn. They surrounded us, their forms constantly shifting and flowing, never quite resolving into anything definite except for their eyes. Countless pinpricks of pale blue light that floated within the darkness of their bodies. "What do they want?" I asked, pressing my back against Elisa's, or Elizabeth's, as the creatures encircled us. "Everything," Elizabeth whispered. "Your body, your mind, your soul. They feed on it all." One of the shadow creatures reached toward us, its arms stretching impossibly long, fingers elongating into needle-like points. I swatted at it instinctively, but my hand passed through it like smoke. Yet, when it touched my skin, the sensation was horrifyingly tangible, cold and rough, like sandpaper made of ice. I screamed, jerking away. Where it had touched me, my skin burned with cold, turning an alarming shade of gray. "They can't be fought," Elizabeth said. "Not directly." "Then what do we do?" I was nearly hysterical now, watching as more of the creatures closed in. Elizabeth's eyes, in Elisa's face, narrowed with calculation. Then, abruptly, she shoved me toward the creatures. "A distraction," she hissed, darting for the stairs. I fell among the shadow beings, their cold forms enveloping me like toxic smoke. Wherever they touched, my skin burned and numbed simultaneously. Their whispers grew louder in my ears, words in no language I knew, yet somehow I understood their hungry intent. Through a gap in their undulating forms, I saw Elizabeth and Elisa's body reach the top of the stairs. She turned back once, and for a moment I thought I saw regret in those altered eyes. Then she was gone, descending toward freedom. Anger surged through me, not just at Elizabeth's betrayal, but at the thought of losing Elise. I hadn't come this far, faced these impossible horrors, to give up now. The journal. Elizabeth had mentioned it, the record she'd kept. If she'd found a way to bind herself to this place, perhaps the method was recorded there, and perhaps it could be undone. Fighting against the nauseating touch of the shadow creatures, I lunged toward the small table where the leather-bound book still lay. My fingers closed around it just as one of the Watchers wrapped its elongated limbs around my waist, its touch burning through my clothing. Pain drove me to my knees, but I clutched the journal to my chest. If I could just open it, find what I needed. The creatures pressed closer, their whispers rising to a deafening chorus. My vision began to dim, black spots dancing before my eyes. With the last of my strength, I forced the book open to a random page. The handwriting was cramped and frantic, but legible. They cannot abide their own reflection. Whatever these beings are, they flee from themselves when mirrored. I've used this to keep them at bay, surrounding my binding circle with shards of looking glass. Reflection. Mirrors. I desperately searched my pockets and pack. Nothing useful until my fingers closed around my phone. Its black screen, when powered off, was reflective. I activated the screen, its light pitifully small in the surrounding darkness. But when I turned it toward the nearest shadow creature, holding the glossy surface like a shield, The effect was immediate. The being recoiled, its form rippling as if in pain. The whispers took on a higher pitch. Distress or anger, I couldn't tell. I scrambled to my feet, waving the phone at the encroaching shadows. They retreated enough to clear a path to the stairs. Not waiting for them to recover, I ran, nearly falling down the rotting steps in my haste. On the ground floor, I could hear movement from outside, someone or something circling the house. Elizabeth, trying to escape the property, or something worse. I had the journal. If there was a way to drive Elizabeth out of Elise's body, it might be in these pages, but I needed time and safety to search for it. The front door stood open to the clearing, but I hesitated. What if the watchers could follow me outside? What if there were more of them in the forest? A crash from above decided me. Part of the upper floor giving way, or the creatures breaking through whatever invisible barrier had confined them to that space. Either way, I couldn't stay. I burst out of the house into the clearing. The daylight seemed unnaturally bright after the gloom inside, momentarily blinding me. When my vision cleared, I saw Elise, or rather Elizabeth in Elise's body, at the edge of the clearing, struggling against invisible restraints. She thrashed and clawed at the air, her face contorted with effort. "It won't let me leave," she cried when she saw me. "The binding is too strong." I approached cautiously, keeping my distance. "What binding?" "The spell that's kept me here all these years." She gestured at the ground. For the first time, I noticed that the clearing wasn't natural. It formed a perfect circle around the house, the grass giving way to bare earth at its edge, as if nothing would grow there. I thought with a physical body I could cross it, but I was wrong. A plan began forming in my mind. If Elizabeth was bound to this place, perhaps I could use that. Force her to release Elise. "Let my friend go," I demanded, holding up the journal. "Or I'll destroy your only record." Elizabeth's eyes widened. "You wouldn't. It's the only account of what happened here, the only proof." "I don't care about proof. I care about Elise. You don't understand. The book contains the binding spell. Destroy it, and the Watchers will be free to leave this place too. They'll spread beyond these woods." I hesitated. Was she telling the truth or manipulating me? Behind me, the house creaked ominously. I glanced back to see shadow forms oozing from the doorway and windows, hovering at the threshold as if reluctant or unable to enter the daylight. "They're getting stronger," Elizabeth said. "My presence in a physical body is empowering them somehow. Soon, they'll be able to cross into the clearing, and then we're both doomed. Then let Elise go. Return to whatever you were before." "I can't. Once the possession is complete, it can't be undone except by my willing departure or—" She trailed off. "Or what?" Elizabeth's gaze dropped to the ground. "Or by the host's death." Ice formed in my stomach. No, there has to be another way. There isn't. Elizabeth's voice, Elise's voice, softened. "I'm sorry. I was desperate. Alone for so long." I opened the journal, frantically flipping through pages. There had to be something, some clue, some alternative she wasn't telling me. The pages were filled with increasingly erratic entries. Elizabeth Carroll's descent into fear and obsession was documented in handwriting that grew more frenzied with each page. Diagrams, symbols, desperate prayers, and then, toward the end, the binding spell itself. It was horrifyingly simple. Blood and will, a circle of protection, and words in a language that hurt my eyes to look upon. Elizabeth had bound herself to the property to escape the Watchers, but in doing so had trapped herself in a half-existence, neither alive nor dead, for over a century. And at the very end, a single line that made my heart skip. The binding works both ways. If I am bound to this place, so too are they. Should I ever escape, they will follow. I looked up to see the shadow creatures pressing against an invisible barrier at the edge of the house, their forms roiling with frustrated hunger. More had appeared, dozens now, all straining toward us. "They'll follow you," I said to Elizabeth. "If you leave in Elise's body, they'll follow and spread beyond this forest." Something like shame crossed her borrowed features. I would be free. After so long? At what cost? How many people would these things take once unleashed? How many families destroyed, like yours was? She flinched at that. For a moment, I thought I saw the real Elise surfacing in her eyes. "Becca?" The voice was unmistakably Elise's, frightened, confused. "What's happening?" "Elise! Fight her! Don't let her take you!" But the moment passed. Elizabeth's colder presence reasserted control, Elise's features hardening into an unfamiliar mask. "She's too weak." She invited me in, however unknowingly. This body is mine now. The shadows were growing denser, their whispers louder, their hunger palpable even across the clearing. One particularly large form surged against the invisible boundary, causing ripples in the air like heat waves off hot asphalt. I had seconds, maybe minutes, before they broke through. An idea struck me. Terrible, dangerous, but possibly our only chance. The binding spell worked both ways. Elizabeth was bound to this place, and so were the Watchers. What if I could strengthen that binding rather than break it? The blood and will part would be easy enough. The words, I couldn't pronounce them, but perhaps intent was what mattered most in these things. I flipped to the page with the binding spell, studying the crude circle diagram. It already encompassed the house and clearing. If I could reinforce it somehow. "What are you doing?" Elizabeth demanded, suddenly alert to my plan. "Saving Elise, and maybe you too, in a way." I began walking the perimeter of the clearing, keeping well away from both Elizabeth and the shadow creatures still pressing against the invisible barrier. The ground beneath my feet felt strange, vibrating subtly. My name is Elijah Mercer. I'm 34 years old. This happened in October of 2024, though sometimes it feels like yesterday. Sometimes it feels like it's still happening. The Blackbird State Forest in Delaware wasn't our first choice for our annual team-building retreat. But after last year's fiasco at the beach resort, where Marcus had gotten so drunk he'd tried to swim to the horizon at 3 a.m., our supervisor Hannah had insisted on somewhere more isolated. Somewhere with fewer distractions, she'd said with that tight smile that meant she was remembering fishing Marcus out of the Atlantic. We were 6 in total: me, Marcus, Hannah, Diane, Trevor, and Liam. All of us worked at Pinnacle Marketing in Wilmington, a digital ad agency where the pressure was high and the turnover was higher. These annual retreats were supposed to strengthen team bonds, but usually they just meant drinking somewhere that wasn't the office. Hannah had arranged everything, booking 3 rustic cabins at the northern edge of Blackbird Forest. "They're primitive," she warned us. "Limited cell service, minimal electricity, and outdoor toilets. But there's a main lodge with Wi-Fi if you get desperate." "It'll be a chance to disconnect," Diane had said optimistically. Diane was always optimistic. At 42, she was the oldest on our team and had a maternal air that made her both comforting and slightly annoying. She'd already packed first aid supplies for everyone, as if we were children going to summer camp. The cabins were a 2-mile hike from the parking area. When we arrived that Friday afternoon, the ranger station was already closed, but Hannah had the cabin keys and a crude map. "Everyone got their phones charged?" Trevor asked, looking nervously at the dense forest ahead. At 26, he'd been with the company only 6 months. His signature look was perpetual anxiety. "That's defeating the purpose," Hannah said. "Besides, reception will be spotty at best." "Great," Marcus muttered. He was still bitter about being forced to come. After the beach incident, which had resulted in a mild case of hypothermia and major damage to his pride, he'd been hoping for a pass this year. No such luck. As we hiked deeper into the forest, the late afternoon sun filtered through the canopy of oak, maple, and pine trees. In any other circumstance, I might have found it beautiful. The air was crisp with autumn, leaves crunching beneath our boots. But there was something off about the place. Perhaps it was the unusual silence. Forests should be noisy, birds, insects, small animals rustling in the underbrush. But Blackbird was eerily quiet. Anyone else think it's too quiet? Liam voiced my thoughts. He was our creative director, a tall, bearded man with sharp eyes that missed nothing. Where are all the birds? Maybe we scared them away, Diane suggested. Maybe they know something we don't, Marcus said darkly. Hannah shot him a look. Don't start. Our cabins were nestled in a small clearing. Simple wooden structures with slanted roofs, each with a tiny porch and a single window. They looked like they'd been there for decades, the wood weathered gray by time and elements. Home sweet home, Hannah announced, distributing the keys. 2 people per cabin. I've already assigned rooms. Diane and I will take cabin 1, Elijah and Marcus in cabin 2, Trevor and Liam in cabin 3. Marcus groaned beside me. We'd been friends once before the company had promoted me over him last year. Now, there was always an undercurrent of resentment in our interactions. 2 days sharing a tiny cabin with him wasn't my idea of fun either. Let's get settled before dark, Hannah continued. We'll meet at the fire pit for dinner at 7. I've brought hot dogs and marshmallows. Cabin 2 was as basic inside as out. 2 twin beds with thin mattresses, a small table with a kerosene lamp, and a wood-burning stove that looked ancient. Dibs on the bed away from the window, Marcus said immediately, dropping his pack on it. Fine by me. I didn't care which bed I got. I was more concerned with the overall feeling of wrongness that I couldn't shake. Maybe it was just being in nature after months of city living. Or maybe it was the knowledge that I was sharing a small space with someone who probably wouldn't mind if I disappeared into the woods. As I unpacked, I noticed weird scratches on the cabin wall next to my bed. At first, I thought they were just gouges in the wood, but looking closer, they seemed deliberate, like someone had carved a pattern. 5 vertical lines with a horizontal line crossing through them, repeated several times. Check this out, I called to Marcus. He barely glanced over. Probably just kids messing around. It looks like some kind of tally, I said, or a symbol. Whatever. He busied himself with arranging his sleeping bag. By the time we headed to the fire pit, dusk had fallen. The forest seemed to press in closer in the fading light. Hannah had already started a fire, and Diane was setting out paper plates and plastic utensils. Everyone settled in? Hannah asked brightly. My cabin has no heat, Liam complained. The stove's broken. Ours too, I said. We'll need extra blankets if it gets as cold as the forecast says. There should be some in the supply box under each bed, Hannah said. If not, we can share. We roasted hot dogs and marshmallows over the fire, the flames casting long shadows across our faces. Someone produced a flask of whiskey, which made its way around the circle. The alcohol and food helped ease the strange tension I'd been feeling, and soon we were sharing office gossip and client horror stories. Did you hear about Rivertech pulling their account? Trevor asked, his face flushed from whiskey. No way, Diane gasped. That was like 20% of our billings. Guess we'd better make sure this retreat works then, Marcus said. We need to be a well-oiled machine when we get back. Hannah stood suddenly. I almost forgot. I have team-building exercises planned for tomorrow. We'll split into pairs and do a scavenger hunt through the forest. A chorus of groans met this announcement. Come on, she cajoled. It'll be fun, and the winning team gets to skip the monthly revenue report meeting. That got everyone's attention. Those meetings were notorious for lasting hours. As the fire died down and the whiskey ran out, we drifted back to our cabins. The night had grown cold, and I could see my breath clouding in front of me. Marcus and I didn't speak as we prepared for bed. I found the extra blankets Hannah had mentioned and piled them on top of my sleeping bag. Just as I was about to turn off the kerosene lamp, I heard it, a faint melodic whistling from somewhere in the forest. Do you hear that? I asked Marcus. He cocked his head. Hear what? I frowned. The sound was distinct, a tune that was almost familiar, like something from childhood that I couldn't quite place. Nothing. Must have been the wind. But as I lay in the darkness, I kept hearing it. That haunting, gentle whistle. Sometimes seeming close, sometimes far away. It wasn't until I was on the edge of sleep that I realized what it reminded me of. The lullaby my grandmother used to sing. But that was impossible. My grandmother had been dead for 20 years, and her lullaby had been in Polish, a language no one else I knew spoke. I must have fallen asleep eventually because the next thing I knew, Marcus was shaking me awake. "Dude, get up. It's almost 9, and Hannah's already been by twice." I blinked groggily. Sunlight streamed through the dusty window, much brighter than it should have been at 9 in the morning. "What time is it really?" I asked, reaching for my phone. The battery was at 20%, even though I'd charged it fully before we left. 9. I told you. Marcus was already dressed in hiking boots and a fleece. "They're waiting for us at the fire pit. The scavenger hunt, remember?" I dressed quickly and splashed water on my face from a jug we'd brought. Outside, the day was crisp and clear, but the unnatural silence of the forest persisted. No birds, no squirrels, not even the buzz of insects. At the fire pit, the others were huddled around a map Hannah had spread out. "Finally," Hannah said as we approached. "Okay, here's how this works. I've hidden 5 objects throughout this section of the forest." She indicated an area on the map. Each team needs to find one specific object. First team back with their object wins. Simple. "What are the teams?" Diane asked. I thought we'd mix it up. Elijah and Trevor, Marcus and me, Diane and Liam. I glanced at Trevor, who gave me a nervous smile. He was nice enough, but so new that we'd barely spoken beyond basic office pleasantries. Hannah handed each team a slip of paper. "This describes your object and gives a general hint of where to find it. You have until 4 p.m. Meet back here no matter what." Trevor and I unfolded our paper. A red bandana tied to a tree with a distinctive fork near the eastern creek. "There's a creek?" Trevor asked, studying the map. "Apparently." I pointed to a thin blue line about a mile east of our cabins. "Looks like we head that way." As we set off, I couldn't shake the feeling that we were being watched. Every few minutes I'd turn quickly, hoping to catch a glimpse of whatever might be following us, but there was never anything there. Just trees and more trees. "So, you've been with Pinnacle long?" Trevor asked as we walked. 4 years. You're liking it so far." He shrugged. "It's intense, especially Liam. Does he always critique everything so harshly?" I laughed. "That's just his way. If he's bothering to critique you at all, it means he thinks you've got potential." We reached the creek after about 40 minutes of hiking. It was more of a trickle than a proper creek, winding between moss-covered rocks. "We should follow it," I suggested. "Look for a forked tree." As we walked along the creek bank, the feeling of being watched intensified. The hairs on the back of my neck stood up and I kept hearing faint sounds, like twigs snapping or leaves rustling, but always just at the edge of perception. "Do you feel that?" I asked Trevor. "Feel what?" Like we're not alone out here." Trevor glanced around nervously. "You're freaking me out, man." "Sorry, it's probably nothing." But it wasn't nothing. As we continued our search, I became increasingly certain that something was following us, keeping pace just out of sight among the trees. "There!" Trevor suddenly pointed ahead. "Is that it?" About 50 yards upstream, a red cloth was visible, tied to a branch of a massive oak tree that split into 2 main trunks about 10 feet up. "Good eye," I said, relieved to have found our objective so quickly. The sooner we got back to camp, the better. As Trevor reached up to untie the bandana, I heard it again, that same melodic whistling from the previous night. This time, it was much closer, and unmistakably the Polish lullaby my grandmother used to sing. I whirled around. "Did you hear that?" Trevor, bandana in hand, looked confused. "Hear what?" "That whistling." "No." His eyes darted around. "But I do feel kind of weird all of a sudden. like we're being watched, I finished. That's when we both saw her, a woman standing on the opposite bank of the creek. She was small and hunched, with long gray hair hanging in tangles around her face. She wore what looked like a nightgown, muddied at the hem. Her skin was pale, almost gray, and her eyes were wrong somehow, too large and too dark for her face. "Hello?" I called, my voice sounding strange even to myself. The woman didn't respond. She just stared at us with those unsettling eyes. "Maybe she lives nearby?" Trevor whispered. "Should we ask if she's okay?" Before I could answer, the woman opened her mouth. What came out wasn't speech, but that same whistled lullaby I'd been hearing. The melody drifted across the creek, somehow both beautiful and terrifying. "We need to go," I said, grabbing Trevor's arm. "Now." We backed away slowly, not turning our backs on the woman. She made no move to follow us, just continued that eerie whistling. Only when we were well into the trees did I dare to look away, pulling Trevor into a jog beside me. "What the hell was that?" Trevor gasped when we finally slowed down. "I don't know." I glanced back, half expecting to see the woman pursuing us, but the forest behind us was empty. Maybe a homeless person, or someone from a nearby property? Trevor didn't look convinced. Neither was I. We made our way back to camp in tense silence, jumping at every sound. The red bandana was clutched tightly in Trevor's hand, as if he was afraid it might disappear if he loosened his grip. The fire pit was empty when we returned. No sign of the other teams. I checked my phone. 1:24 p.m. We had plenty of time before the 4 p.m. deadline. "Should we wait here?" Trevor asked. "Let's check the cabins first," I suggested. "Maybe someone came back early." But the cabins were deserted too. An uneasy feeling settled in my stomach. "Let's head back to the fire pit," I said. "The others will return eventually." As we walked back, I noticed something strange. The scratches I'd seen on our cabin wall, that odd tally or symbol, were now on the exterior of all 3 cabins. 5 vertical lines crossed by 1 horizontal, repeated multiple times. They looked freshly carved, the wood pale where it had been exposed. "Were those there before?" I asked, pointing. Trevor frowned. "I don't think so." "What are they?" "I don't know. I saw them inside our cabin yesterday, but not on the outside. And definitely not on all the cabins." We returned to the fire pit and built a small fire, more for comfort than warmth. The day had grown overcast, and a chill wind had picked up, rustling through the trees with whispered urgency. By 3:30, there was still no sign of the others. My attempts to call or text them failed. No service, as expected. Trevor was visibly anxious, his leg jiggling as he sat on a log by the fire. "Maybe they got lost," he suggested. "All 4 of them? With maps?" "What should we do?" I stood up. "I'm going to check the cabins one more time. Then we might need to hike out to the ranger station. We can't just leave them." "We're not leaving them. We're getting help." The cabins were still empty, but as I approached ours, I noticed the door was ajar. I was certain we'd closed it earlier. "Hello?" I called, pushing the door open wider. The interior was exactly as we'd left it, except for one thing. On my bed lay a small, crudely made doll fashioned from twigs and twine. Its head was a knot of roots, with small stones pressed in for eyes. "What the hell?" Trevor whispered behind me. I picked up the doll cautiously. It felt wrong in my hand. Not just unpleasant, but actively malevolent, as if the twigs and twine harbored some dark intent. "We should go," Trevor said. "Right now." I agreed, but as I turned to leave, something caught my eye. More of those scratched symbols had appeared on the inside walls, dozens of them now, covering every surface. 5 vertical lines, 1 horizontal crossing through. Outside, the wind had picked up, and the sky had darkened considerably. It looked like a storm was brewing. "We need to get to the ranger station," I said. "Now." We gathered what supplies we could carry quickly, water, energy bars, flashlights, and set off down the trail toward the parking area. Neither of us spoke about the doll or the symbols. It was as if naming them might give them more power. We'd gone perhaps half a mile when we heard voices ahead. "Hello?" I called out. "Hannah? Liam?" Figures emerged from the trees, Hannah and Marcus looking disheveled but unharmed. "Where have you been?" I demanded. "We've been waiting for hours." Hannah gave me a strange look. "What are you talking about? It's barely noon." I checked my phone. 4:17 p.m. "No, it's after 4. Marcus pulled out his phone. "My phone says 11:52. Trevor showed them his phone, which matched mine. "This is weird." "Did you find your object?" Hannah asked, seemingly unconcerned about the time discrepancy. "Yes," Trevor said, producing the red bandana. "What about you?" "Still looking," Marcus admitted. "We're trying to find a blue-painted rock by a tree with a face." "Have you seen Diane and Liam?" I asked. Hannah shook her head. "Not since this morning." I explained about our plan to go to the ranger station, but Hannah was dismissive. "We can't leave without Diane and Liam. They probably just lost track of time." "There's something wrong here," I insisted, and told them about the woman by the creek, the doll on my bed, and the symbols multiplying across the cabins. "You're overreacting," Hannah said, but I could see doubt in her eyes. "But fine. If they're not back by actual 4 p.m., we'll go for help." We returned to camp together. The fire we'd built had died down to embers, though it seemed like it had burned through much more wood than it should have in what Hannah and Marcus believed was less than an hour. At 4:30 by my phone, 12:05 by Hannah's, Diane emerged from the forest alone. She was limping slightly with a torn sleeve and scratches on her face. "What happened?" I rushed to help her to a log by the fire. "Where's Liam?" Diane's eyes were wide with shock. "I don't know. We got separated about an hour ago. I've been looking everywhere for him." "Separated? How?" Hannah demanded. "We found our object, a yellow frisbee wedged in some rocks. But on our way back, we heard this whistling." She looked at me. It was beautiful but unsettling. Liam wanted to find the source. I told him we should stick to the trail, but he insisted. He went off into the trees and I followed him. But then I couldn't see him anymore. I called and called, but he never answered. A chill ran through me that had nothing to do with the weather. "This whistling, was it like a lullaby?" Diane nodded slowly. "Yes. How did you know?" I told her about our encounter with the woman by the creek. "We need to find Liam," Hannah said firmly. "We'll split up." "No," Trevor and I said simultaneously. "No more splitting up," I insisted. "We stay together. All of us." In the end, we agreed to search for Liam as a group. We gathered flashlights, water, and a whistle Hannah had brought for emergencies. The sky continued to darken, and I was certain it would rain before long. Diane led us to where she'd last seen Liam, a dense section of forest about half a mile west of our camp. Every few minutes, Hannah would blow the whistle and we'd all call Liam's name, then fall silent to listen for a response. There never was one. As we pushed deeper into the forest, I began to notice more symbols carved into trees, the same 5 vertical lines crossed by 1 horizontal. They seemed to be guiding us in a particular direction, becoming more frequent as we continued. "Does anyone else see these markings?" I asked. Marcus nodded grimly. "They're everywhere." "What do they mean?" Trevor asked. "Nothing good," Diane murmured. The first drops of rain began to fall as we reached a small clearing. In the center stood a massive pine tree, far taller and older than any we'd passed. Its trunk was covered in the carved symbols, so densely packed they formed a kind of twisted pattern, and tied to the tree, arms stretched around the trunk as if embracing it, was Liam. "Oh my God!" Hannah rushed forward. "Wait!" I called, but she was already at the tree. Liam's head hung forward, chin on chest. He didn't respond to Hannah's touch or voice. For a horrible moment, I thought he was dead, but then I saw his chest rise and fall with shallow breaths. "Liam." Hannah shook him gently. "Can you hear me?" Slowly, Liam raised his head. His eyes were open but vacant, staring at something none of us could see. His lips moved, forming words without sound. "We need to get him down," Marcus said, moving to untie Liam's hands. The moment Marcus touched the rope, Liam began to scream. A high, piercing sound that didn't seem human. His body convulsed against the tree, eyes rolling back to show only whites. "Stop!" Diane cried. "You're hurting him!" Marcus jerked back, and Liam's screams subsided to whimpers. "What the hell?" Marcus whispered. I approached cautiously, examining the rope binding Liam without touching it. It wasn't rope at all, but some kind of plant fiber woven into an intricate pattern. The same material had been used to make the doll left on my bed. "We need to cut him free," I said. "Does anyone have a knife?" Everyone checked their pockets and packs. No knife. "There should be a multi-tool in the emergency kit back at camp," Hannah said. "I'll go," Marcus volunteered. "Not alone," I said. "Trevor, go with him. Diane, Hannah, and I will stay with Liam." Marcus looked like he might argue, but then nodded. He and Trevor set off back toward camp, promising to return as quickly as possible. The rain was falling steadily now, soaking through our clothes. Liam had gone quiet again, his head lolling forward. "What happened to him?" Hannah whispered. "What is this place?" Before I could respond, I heard it. The whistled lullaby, clear despite the rain and wind. It seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere at once. "She's here," Diane breathed. We pressed close together, backs to Liam and the tree, scanning the forest around us. The rain made it difficult to see far, but I caught glimpses of movement among the trees. Flashes of that pale nightgown, tangled gray hair. "Who is she?" Hannah asked. "What does she want?" "I don't know," I admitted. "But I think she's the one who put those symbols everywhere. And I think she's the one who did this to Liam." The whistling grew louder, and with it came a sense of pressure in my head, as if the melody itself was trying to push its way into my mind. Beside me, Diane gasped and pressed her hands to her ears. "Make it stop," she moaned. Hannah grabbed my arm, her nails digging in. "Elijah, look!" From every direction, figures were emerging from the trees. Women in nightgowns, men in old-fashioned clothes, children in simple shifts. All had the same pallid skin and oversized dark eyes as the woman from the creek. And all were whistling that same haunting lullaby. "What the fuck?" I breathed. The figures moved with an unnatural grace, almost floating over the forest floor as they approached. They formed a loose circle around us, leaving just enough space between them that we could see escape routes but would have to pass close to one of them to take it. "What do we do?" Hannah whispered. "Don't run," I said, though every instinct screamed at me to flee. "That's what they want." "How do you know?" "I don't. But somehow I was certain. These things, whatever they were, wanted to separate us." The whistling swelled, becoming almost unbearably beautiful. I felt my resolve weakening, a powerful urge to step away from my companions and walk into the waiting arms of one of the pale figures. "Don't listen," I shouted, but my voice sounded distant, muffled. Diane swayed beside me, her eyes glazing over. She took a stumbling step forward. I grabbed her arm. "Diane, no!" The moment I touched her, one of the figures, a tall man in what looked like clothes from another century, let out a sound like steam escaping a kettle. The others took up the sound, their whistling transforming into a high-pitched wail that sent daggers of pain through my skull. Diane jerked free of my grasp and ran, not toward the figures but back toward camp. Hannah hesitated only a moment before following. "Wait," I yelled, but they were already gone, swallowed by the rain and darkness. I was alone with Liam, surrounded by the pale figures whose wailing had subsided back into that hypnotic whistling. I couldn't leave Liam, but I couldn't stay and wait for whatever fate these creatures had planned either. Steeling myself, I turned and began working at the plant fiber bindings with my fingers. They were tough and slippery with rain, resistant to my efforts to untie or break them. Behind me, the whistling grew more insistent, the circle of figures drawing closer. I could feel their cold presence at my back, hear the shuffle of feet on wet leaves. Come on, I muttered, digging my nails into the fibers. Liam stirred, his eyes fluttering open. For a moment, they focused on mine, clear and aware. Run, he whispered. It's too late for me. Agnes Crowley has me now. Who is Agnes Crowley? I demanded. Instead of answering, Liam began to whistle. The same lullaby as the figures around us. His eyes darkened and expanded, becoming like those of the creatures. I stumbled back in horror, bumping into something cold and unyielding. Hands gripped my shoulders. Thin, strong fingers that dug into my flesh with inhuman strength. Twisting free, I saw the woman from the creek directly behind me, her face inches from mine. Up close, her eyes weren't just oversized and dark. They were completely black, without iris or pupil. Her skin wasn't just pale, but translucent, blue veins visible beneath like rivers on a map. "Agnes," I whispered. Her mouth stretched into a smile too wide for her face, revealing teeth that were sharp and numerous. The whistling stopped, and in the sudden silence, she spoke, her voice a rasping whisper like dry leaves scraping stone. "Come home, lost one. Come home to the forest." I ran. I pushed past her, feeling her fingers tear at my jacket, and sprinted blindly through the trees. The rain lashed at my face, branches whipped my arms and chest, but I didn't slow. Behind me, that terrible whistling resumed, now with an urgent, angry quality. I had no idea if I was heading toward camp or deeper into the forest. All I knew was that I had to get away from Agnes Crowley and her pale followers. And Liam. God, poor Liam, who was now one of them. I ran until my lungs burned and my legs threatened to give out. Only then did I slow to a jog, trying to get my bearings. The rain had eased to a drizzle, and I realized I could see lights ahead, flashlights, moving erratically through the trees. "Hello?" I called, hoping it was my colleagues and not more of those creatures. "Elijah?" It was Trevor's voice. "Is that you?" Relief flooded me. I hurried toward the lights and found Trevor and Marcus both looking as terrified as I felt. "Where are the others?" Marcus asked. "Diane and Hannah ran off," I said between gasps for breath. "And Liam? Liam is gone. He's one of them now." "One of who?" Trevor asked. I explained what had happened at the tree, about Agnes Crowley and her followers, about how Liam had changed before my eyes. "We need to find Diane and Hannah and get the hell out of here," Marcus said. "Forget our stuff. We hike out now." We made our way back to camp, calling softly for Hannah and Diane. The cabins were dark and empty when we arrived. No sign of our missing colleagues. "Maybe they already left for the ranger station," Trevor suggested hopefully. "Without us?" "I doubt it," I said. "We need to look around camp." We split up to search the immediate area, agreeing to stay within shouting distance. I checked our cabin first, then Hannah and Diane's. Both were empty, though I noticed with a chill that the twig doll was gone from my bed. As I was leaving cabin 1, I spotted something on the ground near the steps. A cell phone. Hannah's, based on the case. The screen was shattered, and when I tried the power button, nothing happened. "Found anything?" Marcus called from nearby. "Hannah's phone," I replied. "Broken." "Come see this," he said, his voice tight with tension. I followed his voice to the fire pit. The embers of our earlier fire were cold, apparently doused by the rain. But next to the pit, arranged in a neat row, were 6 twig dolls, identical to the one that had been on my bed. Each had those stone eyes, staring blankly upward. And each wore a small scrap of fabric that I recognized with horror, bits of clothing belonging to each member of our team. The doll on the far right had a strip of Liam's green flannel shirt. "Jesus," I breathed. Trevor emerged from the trees, his flashlight beam dancing wildly. "Guys, I found something. Footprints heading north, away from the hiking trail. They look fresh." We followed the footprints, clearly belonging to two people moving quickly, for about a quarter mile before they led us to another clearing. This one was smaller than where we'd found Liam, but at its center stood another ancient pine tree. And tied to it, just as Liam had been, was Hannah. "No," Marcus whispered. Unlike Liam, Hannah was conscious and struggling against her bonds. When she saw us, her eyes widened with terror. "Run!" she screamed. "It's a trap." Too late, I realized our mistake. The whistling started again, rising from the forest around us like mist. The pale figures materialized from the darkness, their black eyes reflecting our flashlight beams. "Back to back," I ordered, and we formed a tight triangle facing outward. Agnes Crowley stepped forward, her unnatural smile revealing those terrible teeth. "All return to the forest," she rasped. "As it should be." "What do you want?" Marcus demanded. "Want?" She tilted her head at an impossible angle. "We want nothing. We are the forest, and the forest reclaims its own." "We don't belong to the forest," Trevor said, his voice shaking. "All flesh returns to the earth," Agnes replied. "Some sooner than later." She raised a hand, and her followers began to close the circle around us. I saw now that some held crude knives made from sharpened stone or bone. "The symbols," I said suddenly. "What do they mean? The 5 lines with one crossing through?" Agnes's smile widened further, splitting her face almost in half. "Counting. Always counting. 5 trees take 1 soul." With that cryptic answer, she lunged forward with inhuman speed, her hands outstretched toward Trevor. He screamed as her fingers closed around his throat, lifting him off his feet with impossible strength. I swung my flashlight, connecting with Agnes's arm. There was a crack like a branch breaking, and Trevor fell to the ground, gasping. Agnes didn't make a sound, but the other creatures let out that kettle whistle wail, surging toward us. Marcus pulled Trevor to his feet. "Run!" he shouted. "I'll get Hannah." I hesitated, torn between helping Marcus and fleeing with Trevor. "Go!" Marcus yelled, already fighting his way toward Hannah. Trevor